let me go on. Director Gabbard, you are the security executive and set access guidelines for classified information. Did you contact the defense secretary or others after this specific military planning was put out and say, hey, we should be doing this in a skiff?
There was no classified material that was shared in that
So then if there was no classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security. Bobbing and weaving and trying to, filibuster your answer. So please answer the question. If this was Director Gabbard, if this was a rank and file intelligence officer who did this kind of careless behavior, what would you do with them?
Senator, I'll reiterate that there was no classified material that was shared in that
And if there's no classified materials, share. And then if there's no classified materials, then you can't even answer the question whether you're on the chat. This is strangely familiar, and I think my colleagues will remember, when you couldn't answer the question, is Edward Snowden a traitor? Man, I have serious doubts about anyway. Director Gabbard, I'm going to give you this. Tweeted just 11 days ago, and I'm quoting you. Any unauthorized release of classified information is a violation of the law and will be treated as such. So if this information is classified, what are you going to do?
Senator, 2 points here. First of all, there's a difference between inadvertent release versus
careless and sloppy,
malicious leaks of classified information. The second point is there was no classified information that was on
this committee should get that information. Director Patel, my time's about out, and I'm going to use my 12 seconds that the chairman gave me. Director Patel, has the FBI launched any investigation of this?
Senator, I was just briefed about it late last night, this morning. I don't have an update.
I would like to get an answer by the end of the day.
At this point in the ordinary course of affairs, I would recognize Senator Collins. She asked me to express to you that she is under the weather this morning. She regrets her absence, but anticipates submitting written questions to which I would request your prompt replies for the senator. Senator Cornyn.
Director Gabbard, I applaud President Trump's efforts to try to bring an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. I want to read a statement out of the annual threat assessment and just confirm that you agree with this. It says Russia views its ongoing war with Ukraine as a proxy conflict with the West, and its objective to restore Russian strength and security in its near abroad against perceived U.S. and Western encroachment has increased the risks of unintended escalation between Russia and NATO. Do you agree with that statement? And that is in the annual threat assessment, correct?
Correct.
I'd like to refer to an AP story, Associated Press, dated March 21st, 2025. The title of the article is Western Officials Say Russia is Behind a Campaign of Sabotage Across Europe. This AP map shows it. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that's being made part of the record.
Without objection.
The document that AP compiled, and I presume this is through open sources, documented 59 incidents, including cyber attacks, spreading propaganda, plotting killings, or committing acts of vandalism, arson, sabotage, or espionage. Is that consistent with your understanding and impression of what Russia's currently engaged in Europe?
Senator, I haven't seen that specific article, but I can confirm that we assess Russia's attempts to conduct such sabotage activities in Europe.
Thank you. One of the things that I'm most concerned about following some of the discussions between Russia and Ukraine and the United States and our other allies, obviously, as I said, peace between Ukraine and Russia is the desirable end state. I think you'd have to be crazy to say otherwise. But I also want to talk a little bit about the unexpected or maybe unintended consequences of European insecurity. I know the incoming Chancellor of Germany has talked about the possibility that Germany might share its nuclear weapons with Ukraine and suggested that the UK would be part of that. I know that Poland has talked about acquiring nuclear weapons, and perhaps other European countries to make up for what they view as a receding of the American umbrella of protection. General Krause, what would be the result of a proliferation of nuclear weapon-armed countries in Europe if, in fact, that would occur as a result of the perception of European insecurity?
Senator, thank you for the question. One of the things that the intelligence community works very hard on is to understand who has nuclear weapons throughout the planet. And as discussed in the opening statements, both by the chair and by Director Gabbard, the proliferation and the increase in the types and the lethality of nuclear weapons is one of the things that we have to track and we as a nation are going to have to face. It has changed dramatically in the last 5 years and will continue to change over the next 5 years. The addition of additional countries which have their own deterrence policies and will act in a nuclear dialogue, or the presence of those weapons, the security of those weapons, the movement and the threat of use of those weapons complicates the environment by which all of us will operate and will complicate all of the decisions by which all future conflict and the political decisions that we support of the decision makers.
It makes the world a more dangerous place, does it not?
Senator, yes, it does.
And just by way of history, Ukraine used to have the third largest arsenal of nuclear weapons on the planet. But as a result of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine and the United Kingdom, the Budapest Memorandum documented a commitment by Russia and the United States to protect the territorial integrity of Ukraine in exchange for them giving up their nuclear weapons. Did I correctly summarize the content of the Budapest Memorandum back in 1994?
Yes, Senator, you did, and Ukraine willingly gave up its weapons for the protection of others.
Thank you very much.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And obviously, my colleagues and I feel very strongly about the war planning meeting over unclassified phones. Obviously reckless, obviously dangerous. Both the mishandling of classified information and the deliberate destruction of federal records are potential crimes that ought to be investigated immediately. And I want to make clear that I'm of the view that there ought to be resignation, starting with the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense. Director Ratcliffe and Director Gabbard, have you participated in any other group chats with senior Trump administration officials in which classified information was shared using phones that weren't cleared for such information? Question for the two of you.
Senator, thank you for the question. I haven't, your question was, have I participated in any other group chats sharing classified information? To be clear, I haven't participated in any signal group messaging that relates to any classified information at all.
Okay. Director Gabbard?
Senator, I have the same answer. I have not participated in any signal group chat or any other chat on another app that contained any classified information.
Yeah, and I just think it's important to follow through here. Would the two of you cooperate with an audit to confirm that that is that is the case?
I have no objection.
Senator, I'll certainly comply with any follow-up that the National Security Council would deem appropriate. But again, to be clear, the use of signal message end-to-end encryption applications is permissible and was, in this case, used permissibly, at least to my understanding, and in a lawful manner.
The seriousness of this is so clear. That's why I want to have an audit, and both of you gave me an answer indicating that you would be open to that, and I appreciate it. Director Patel, you weren't in this particular group chat, but have you participated in any chats on unclassified phones with other administration officials relating to national security? And if so, on what other topics?
Thank you for your question, Senator, and not that I can recall.
Okay. Question I have for you, Director Gabbard, involves this question of Elon Musk wasn't going to see the military's China war plans because he said he, quote, has business in China and he would be susceptible perhaps to that. That was his comment. So as DNI, you're responsible for security clearance policies across the government. Under your watch, how are you going to go about carrying out this obligation? Because I think it obviously is a very significant one in terms of American national security.
Thank you, Senator. As you know, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence provides oversight over these different 18 intelligence elements. Leaders within those elements are empowered with that responsibility to uphold the trust that the American people have placed in them. In this example that you've cited, both Secretary Hegseth as well as President Trump completely denied the assertion that Elon Musk was going to receive any kind of classified war plan brief pertaining to China or any other country.
So on the question of whether the president has the prerogative to get clearances is really the area that I want to touch on, because you're formally responsible for security clearance policies, and that's why I'm asking about it. So can a president decide who gets the clearance?
Yes.
So what about your role? You're formally responsible for security clearance policies.
That is also true.
So how do we resolve it? President just gets his way.
The elected president and commander-in-chief has the authority to provide a security clearance to those who he deems necessary.
Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member, I think we have to have a further discussion on this and figure out what the ground rules, are. I think it's clear what the director says. I just think we need more clarity, because I think you have the formal responsibility for security clearances, and now we've heard that this somehow is going to be the president's project, and I think we ought to have further discussions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Langford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all of you and your service to the country. It matters. There are a lot of citizens of our country right now that have much greater security in their life because of the work that you do and the people that are working around you do. So I just want to say I appreciate that. For the folks in Oklahoma, they would definitely want me to be able to say thank you for your service. Let me ask a couple of questions on this. Director Gabbard, let me start with you on this. Iran has been listed as one of the top sponsors of terrorism for a very long time. They are the primary armors of Hezbollah, of Hamas, of the Houthis. They're arming the Russians to be able to kill Ukrainians. They continue to be able to destabilize the region. And just in the recent days, when many nations in the Gulf region have talked about how to provide greater stability, Iranian leadership stepped out and made very clear statements. They want a one-state solution for Israel, and it's to drive out all Jews. So this continues to be an issue, not just for the region, but for Americans in particular. So my question is on this is the sanctions and the effect of sanctions, what we know about the Iranian response. Under the Biden administration, those sanctions will turn down, where, quite frankly, Iran has been able to sell $90 billion in oil on the global market to be able to rearm itself and all the others around the region. Now sanctions are now going back onto Iran again. What do we know about the effect of those sanctions?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. These sanctions have just begun to be reinstated, so the full effects have not yet borne fruit. But the message that the president has sent with his maximum pressure campaign is certainly heard. As the chairman mentioned in his opening remarks, President Trump recently sent a letter to the leader of Iran expressing his interest in direct talks in order to try to de-escalate and to prevent war, prevent Iran from gaining a nuclear weapon, but also stated that there would be military consequences if there was no direct negotiations. So President Trump is continuing to carry out his vision and mission of peace through strength, acting in the best interests of the American people. We will see what choices are made from here.
Okay, thank you. Director Patel, during the last administration and the very open border policy that they had, we had some years, including 2022 and 2023, where there were 70,000 individuals that were released into the country that were identified as special interest aliens. This is something this committee and the Homeland Security Committee tried over and over again to get details on. The Biden administration was unwilling to be able to share any of the details on the special interest aliens, led to a great amount of frustration. The comment came often back to us is that FBI is going to track all these individuals and to be able to identify them, even though it was 70,000 a year that were coming into the country. You just walked into this position and trying to get your feet on the ground in so many different issues that are outstanding on that. I raised to you the issue of individuals that are currently illegally present in the country going through a process but are listed as special interest aliens. By definition from the administration, those are individuals that we don't know their level of risk, but they're considered a national security risk, but we don't know anything else about them from there. So how are you trying to get on top of the number of people that are criminal aliens in the country, but also these special interest aliens that come from terrorist areas?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate your question. As far as the FBI is concerned, you hit on it. Criminal. So we are focused across our interagency partners at DHS, ICE, CBP, CISA, and elsewhere to identify through our information sharing networks that we have stood up with state and local law enforcement to provide us the details on any criminal evidence relating to any of the individuals you highlighted. And if there's a nexus there, a case will be opened, by the line agents who predicated lawful and factual basis to do so. And we will further refer that matter to the Department of Justice for prosecution. We are reviewing all of these cases anew, and we will report back to you, Senator, with some fidelity on the outcome of that process.
Okay, thank you. Are you getting good feedback from social media technology companies and cooperation from them on illegal activities that are promoted on their site? All the different sites have rules and standards for what can and can't be done on that. But for instance, in the border areas, many of the sites are allowing child trafficking, or they're allowing basically the hiring of Americans to come be drivers and such, and they know this is being circumvented. Are they working with you on that to be able to take illegal content off their sites?
Thank you, Senator. And we have engaged directly at the top levels of all the private sector software communities and social media companies, and they have been very helpful because they have been told that this is a priority for me at the FBI to work with them because they have so much information to share back with us. Now, that's, of course, just on the public systems. We're not talking about the dark net.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Ratcliffe, I want to start with you. Who determined that the content of this discussion on Signal was not classified?
Senator, I guess I'm not.
Well, for example,
I can speak to my personal knowledge. There was no classified
agent mentioned as part of this story. Normally, that would be classified information. So I guess what I'm asking is, did you just determine it was not classified, or was there any declassification after the fact?
So to be clear, so everyone understands the process, as we talked about, Signal is a permissible use.
I understand
has been used
that.
at the CIA, has been approved by the White House for senior officials.
And appropriate for many conversations.
And recommended by CISA for high-level officials who would be targeted by foreign adversaries to use end-to-end encrypted apps whenever possible, like Signal. In this case, what the National Security Advisor did was to request through a Signal message that there be coordination. So you mentioned the name of a CIA active officer, correct? So
I didn't mention the name.
You didn't mention the name.
Existence of that.
And in the article, the implication was that somehow that was improper. That was not the case. So a CIA officer was not operating undercover. So the request for coordination was for a staff member to coordinate on the high side. So I communicated the name of a CIA officer not operating undercover, completely appropriate, who does openly and routinely coordinate with the White House as a member of my staff. So the intimation there that there was something inappropriate was clearly incorrect.
Did it occur to you that given the sensitive nature of this discussion, that it could just move to the high side?
So that was clearly, Senator, I think the intent was that this was initially set up by the National Security Advisor with the instruction that send a point of contact, and then you will be provided with information further on the high side for high side communication. So I think clearly it reflects that the National Security Advisor intended this to be, as it should have been, a mechanism for coordinating between senior level officials, but not a substitute for using high side or classified communications for anything that would be classified. And I think that that is exactly what did happen.
So I'm curious, did this conversation at some point include information on weapons packages, targets, or timing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Director Gabbard, same question.
Same answer, and defer to the Department of Defense on that question.
Well, those are two different answers, but you're saying that was not part of the conversation?
That's my knowledge.
The precise operational issues were not part of this conversation?
Correct.
Okay. I want to ask you, Director Gabbard, something on a very different track here, which is I very much agree with the conclusion of the ATA that foreign illicit drug actors are a major threat in the United States, and many of you have spoken to this today. Is the IC wrong in its omission of Canada as a source of illicit fentanyl in the ATA? I was surprised, given some of the rhetoric, that there is no mention of Canada in the ATA.
Senator, the focus in my opening and the ATA was really to focus on the most extreme threats in that area. And our assessment is that the most extreme threat related to fentanyl continues to come from and through Mexico.
So the president has stated that the fentanyl coming through Canada is massive, and actually said it was an unusual and extraordinary threat. And that was the language that was used to justify putting tariffs on Canada. I'm just trying to reconcile those two issues. Is it an unusual and extraordinary threat, or is it a minor threat that doesn't even merit mention in the annual threat assessment?
Senator, I don't have the numbers related to Canada in front of me at this time. I'd like to get back to you on the specifics of that answer.
It's less than 1% of the fentanyl that we are able to interdict. But if you have different information, I would very much welcome that.
Senator Budd.
Thank you all for being here. And Director Gabbard, prior to your role here, we had a big storm in western North Carolina, and you were among those first from outside our state to show up. So thank you for your work there. Thank you for your ongoing work there and that of your family as well. It was good to see them when out in western North Carolina last week, so thank you. Director Hawk, so what do we need to do in regards to Volt Typhoon? There's a lot of pre-positioning that went on there. So where are we with that? And what do we need to do in regards to our power companies, whether it's generation or distribution, Duke Energy in my home state, or even the rural electric co-ops? What do we need? What have we learned? And what can I tell them?
Senator, 99% of the critical infrastructure in the United States is controlled by private companies. So that really drives us to talk about how do we partner with industry and with the commercial sector, in this case, with power sector. Volt Typhoon began when industry came to the intelligence community and said, we're seeing anomalous activity, can you help us gain context? And we were able to bring context to that to be able to understand what the threat was and then to ultimately be able to identify who was behind that threat. Since that time, we've continued to work very closely with industry to be able to determine what are the right ways for us to be able to pursue these threats within networks to enable the interagency, to enable our partners and industry to be able to pursue them. That's the approach we have to take. It is a collaboration between the government and industry to be able to eradicate these threats, and we have continued to pursue them together since our first identification and notification that we did related to this particular threat.
Thank you. What have you done on the offensive side here in regards to, I think there were three, Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon, and even Flax Typhoon. Maybe there were others, but those are the three that are known.
Senator, I've been given really clear guidance in terms of what the Secretary of Defense expects in terms of our aggressive approach to be able to restore deterrence, and I look forward to talking with you about that in the closed hearing.
Look forward to that. Directors Gabbard and Ratcliffe and Patel, thank you all again for being here. So as you're all keenly aware, Section 702 of FISA is an extremely useful authority to help keep our nation safe. I also know that we need to rebuild American people's trust and confidence that such authorities are not being misused by the intelligence community to unlawfully target Americans. So since taking over your respective agencies, can you tell me and tell the American people how effective the recent changes have been in protecting privacy and civil liberties of each and every Americans? And then, if you will, comment on how useful the authority is in generating intelligence that actually protects the homeland. We'll start with you, Director Gabbard.
Senator, Section 702, which authorizes the foreign collection of non-U.S. persons outside of the United States, continues to be one of our most effective collection tools to ensure our national security. There are a number of reforms that the Senate passed, that Congress passed last year, that have proven to strengthen the protections of Americans' Fourth Amendment rights. In the short time that I've been in the seat, I've seen a few examples of that directly, most recently through the FISA court, calling in an amici to come in and weigh in on a dispute regarding provisions that would further protect Americans' Fourth Amendment rights. I'll be visiting our friends at the NSA next week and doing a quote-unquote ride-along to observe directly how those reforms that Congress passed are being implemented to protect Americans' civil liberties, and look forward to reporting back after I've had that opportunity.
Thank you. Director Patel.
Thank you, Senator. With my background in FISA and 702, I just want to clearly delineate between FISA Title 1.3 and 702 collection. We need to both ardently defend its use, but also ardently support reforms that allow the American public to entrust that those charged with those capabilities are not violating the Fourth Amendment or any other violation. Speaking to Title I, Title III, when it comes to U.S. persons, I have already included an amendment in terms of FBI language to make sure that when a U.S. person is targeted, that the FBI specifically is responsible for culling through all exculpatory information that is reasonably known and satisfying that burden and stating it in the application. When it comes to 702, Senator, some of the biggest enterprise efforts we have had to thwart national security risk would not have occurred if 702 collection had gone dark. And the FBI continues to use that information to protect the homeland. We've had multiple takedowns in the last 6 months based on 702 and interagency collection processes, but we just need to ensure the American public, and I'm working with my team, that even in the 702 sphere, American citizens' information is protected.
Thank you all. I look forward to the discussion in the closed session.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gabbard, I didn't intend to get into the Jeffrey Goldberg story, but something you said has sort of puzzled me. According to open source reporting at 11:44 on the morning of March 15th, Secretary Hegseth put into this group text a detailed operation plan, including targets, the weapons we were going to be using, attack sequences, and timing. And yet you've testified that nothing in that chain was classified. Wouldn't that be classified? What if that had been made public that morning before the attack took place?
Senator, I can attest to the fact that there were no classified or intelligence equities that were included in that chat group at any time. And I
So the
defer.
attack sequencing and timing and weapons and targets, you don't consider should have been classified?
I
or
defer
were
to the
classified?
Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council on that question.
Well, you're the head of you're the head of the intelligence community, and you're supposed to know about classifications. So your testimony very clearly today is that nothing was in that set of texts that were classified. I'll follow up on Senator Wyden's question. If that's the case, please release that whole text stream so that the public can have a view of what actually transpired on this discussion. It's hard for me to believe that targets and timing and weapons would not have been classified. Well, let me move on. You approved this report, this annual report, prepared by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Is this submitted to the White House routinely in anticipation of its public release?
I don't know what you mean by submitted routinely.
Was this report submitted to the White House before its release today?
It was submitted to them once it was completed. I think probably around the same time it was sent to all of you.
I want to move on. One note that surprised me, I've been on this committee now this is my 13th year. Every single one of these reports that we have had has mentioned global climate change as a significant national security threat, except this one. Has something happened? Has global climate change been solved? Why is that not in this report? And who made the decision that it should not be in the report when it's been in every one of the 11 prior reports?
I can't speak to the decisions made previously, but this annual threat assessment has been focused very directly on the threats that we deem most critical to the United States and our national security. Obviously, we're aware of occurrences within the environment and how they may impact operations, but we're focused on the direct threats to Americans' safety, well-being, and security.
How about how they will impact mass migration, famine, dislocation, political violence, which is the finding, by the way, of the 2019 annual threat assessment under the first Trump administration? You don't consider that a significant national security threat?
For the intelligence community, being aware of the environment that we're operating in is a given. What I focused this annual threat assessment on, and the IC focused this threat assessment on, are the most extreme and critical direct threats to our national security.
Let me ask a direct question. Who decided climate change should be left out of this report after it's been in the prior 11? Where was that decision
I
made?
gave direction to our team at ODNI to focus on the most extreme and critical national security threats that we face.
Your direction include no comments on climate change?
Senator, as I said, I focused on the most extreme and direct national security threats.
That's not a response to my question.
That we face.
Did you instruct that there be no finding in terms of climate change in this report?
I don't recall giving that instruction.
Final questions in a few short seconds that I have left. You all concede, and it's in the report repeatedly, about the cyber danger from China, from Russia, from Iran. Why then is the administration deconstructing CISA? 130 people fired. The General Hawk talked about the importance of public-private cooperation. That section of CISA seems to have been disestablished. What possible policy reason is there for undermining CISA's relationship to the states with regard to elections and to the private sector with regard to cybersecurity when the cybersecurity threat is only growing? Anybody want to tackle that?
I won't speak for all of my colleagues here, but I don't believe any of us have any insight into those specific staffing decisions that have been made.
Well, let me ask you this question. You've all found, the report has found explicitly growing cyber threats, including to elections from Russia, China, Iran. Do you believe that it's in the national interest to diminish our capacity to deal with those cyber issues? Yes or no?
President Trump is focused on effects and making sure that the people that we have and the resources that we have are focused on our national security. He and his team recognize that more people doesn't necessarily always mean better effects. Those are some of the things that are driving the changes that we're seeing across the administration, is getting all of our agencies back and focused on their core mission.
General Hawk, do you agree that? Sorry.
Senator King, your time has
Time is
expired.
up. Thank you.
Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you to all of you for your service to our country. With regard to the issue surrounding Signal, I'm going to address it, but I'm going to address it in the closed session so that we can get more in depth into that issue. In the meantime, I want to direct my first question to Director Ratcliffe. As the debate continues in Washington regarding spectrum, what can you share in this unclassified setting regarding the critical nature of spectrum to national security interests generally?
Thanks for the question, Senator. I know this is an issue of great interest to the Senate, and the potential auction of commercial space on spectrum. Those, as you correctly point out, the discussions about spectrum, I will start out by saying there are national security implications from such an auction were to take place to both the DoD and the IC. I think the discussions that we need to have in a classified setting, I can relate to you that the direction from early meetings that we've had is that the discussion about where that might take place would not affect specifically CIA or IC equities, and I hope that's the case and where the discussion goes. But I think we need to be concerned that a public auction at bands at certain levels would have an impact on our ability to deliver an accurate intelligence picture.
In other words, there are parts of the spectrum which simply cannot be shared with the commercial.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
And we can talk about the specific reasons about why in a classified setting that would cause a diminishment of our ability to deliver a good threat picture to the Commander-in-Chief.
And in some cases, life or death consequences
Absolutely.
Involved. Thank you. Director Patel, first of all, I just want to thank you for what you are doing. And I know that there's a number of items that in your previous life you did that simply can't be discussed, but nonetheless, we've appreciated what you have done for your country already. Today, I just wanted to talk to you about, we've seen a series of public news reports about ISIS threats within the United States. And there have been several successful interdictions, Oklahoma City, Philadelphia, New York. Although the question remains as to the total number of ISIS operatives who were able to breach porous borders in the months and years before policy changes in this January of 2025, to what extent is the FBI tracking operatives who remain in the United States today, and what is the FBI doing to track them down?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate your question and your comments. So the priorities at the FBI since I took over have been violent crime and national security, and this speaks directly to national security. The direction for the FBI is to track down any individuals with any terrorist ties whatsoever, whether it be ISIS or another foreign terrorist organization, and now to include the new designations of the cartels down south and elsewhere. So the FBI is utilizing our Joint Terrorism Task Force, which are situated in all 55 field offices. But the key to success there is our partnership with state and local law enforcement who have the ground level intelligence on some of these operatives. And as you've highlighted, we've already shut down numerous threats, and we've identified publicly where permissible these threats and individuals and where they're coming from. And I think the FBI is doing a very good job right now in collecting this information through our interagency process. And we will continue to thwart every bad actor affiliated with a terrorist organization or otherwise.
Thank you. And Director Hawk, first of all, look, you've talked a little bit already about Salt Typhoon, but what I want to really get into is the things that are moving right now that you haven't had a chance to address, and in particular, Cybercom 2.0 and the need to accelerate that particular plan moving forward. Can you talk just briefly? I've got 40 seconds left. Talk to us a little bit about how critical 2.0 is in terms of countering the cyber activity that's going on through nefarious actors.
Senator, what we were asked to do by Congress was to look at what's the force generation model for the Department of Defense to be able to generate cyber forces. Based off of that request, I produced a recommendation for the secretary that outlined 3 critical things, which is really how we manage the talent, how we develop the talent in the department, and also how we equip that talent underpinned by compute and AI. We've brought that plan initially back to Secretary Hegseth. He told us to go faster. We've delivered him that plan. And now, based off of his guidance, we will now begin to move forward with the rest of the department.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for holding this hearing, and thank you for being here. Mr. Director Ratcliffe, it sounds to me like your testimony today and the Secretary and the DNI's testimony is that there was nothing wrong at all with the signal thread that you were on, that it didn't include any targeting information or battle sequence. That is your testimony. That's your testimony. And I'm a little staggered that that is your view, Director Ratcliffe. Does the CIA have any rules about handling of classified information? Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you, Director Ratcliffe. Do you agree, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said this morning when asked by members of the press what had happened, he said this morning in Hawaii that Atlantic Editor-in-Chief Jeff Goldberg is a, quote, deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of providing hoaxes time and time again. Do you share that evaluation, the Secretary of Defense's evaluation of Jeff Goldberg as a journalist?
Senator, I didn't see those comments. I don't know Jeff Goldberg.
So do you share that view of the Secretary of Defense?
Well, I don't have a view on.
Okay. Assuming that he has that view, I'm curious about whether you are the CIA director. Okay, this has happened. We know it's happened. Did Jeff Goldberg somehow, did he create a hoax that allowed him to become part of this signal thread? Please answer the question. You don't insult the intelligence of the American people. Did he invite himself to the signal thread?
I don't know how he was invited, but clearly he was added.
Clearly it was. Finish your sentence, please.
Clearly he was added to the signal group. Your question is,
you don't know that the president's national security advisor invited him to join the signal thread? Everybody in America knows that. Does the CIA director not know that?
I've seen conflicting reports about who added the reporter to the signal messaging group.
You think that it's perfectly appropriate that there was a reporter added, especially one that the Secretary of Defense says is deceitful, highly discredited, a so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes over and over again? Is your testimony that it was appropriate that he was added to this signal thread?
No, of course not. And
why did you not call?
Hold on, Senator. You're mischaracterizing my testimony.
Good. You answered the question. Let me ask you. When he was added to the thread, you're the CIA director. Why didn't you call out that he was present on the signal thread?
I don't know if you use signal messaging app.
I do. Not for classified information, not for targeting.
Well, neither
not
do I,
for
Senator.
Anything remote.
Neither do I, Senator.
Well, that's what your testimony is today.
It absolutely is not, Senator. Were you not listening at the beginning?
No.
When I said that I was using it as permitted, it is permissible to use.
I agree that's your testimony.
Yeah.
I agree that's your testimony. You asked me if I use it, and I said not for targeting, not for classified information.
And I said I don't either.
I also know Jeff Goldberg. I don't use it to communicate with him, but you thought it was appropriate. By the way, I think he's one of the more outstanding journalists in America, but I'm shocked to find him on a thread that he's reading in the parking lot of a grocery store in Washington, D.C., and your testimony as the director of the CIA is that it's totally appropriate. No. Is it appropriate?
No,
that the president.
That is not what I.
Okay,
when did
go
I say
ahead,
it was?
please.
When did I use the word appropriate?
Well, Go ahead, please.
Well, I didn't.
That everybody in America.
So clearly,
there's nothing to
Senator,
see here is what your testimony is.
No, I never said that.
This is just a normal day at the CIA where we chat about this kind of stuff over Signal. In fact, it's so normal that the last administration left it here for us. That's your testimony today.
That's your testimony.
No, that's
Senator.
not my testimony. That's what you said.
I didn't say any of those things that you just related, Senator.
I heard you say it. We'll let the American people decide. Let me ask you one final point. I'm out of time.
It. Well, are you going to give me a chance?
Is it appropriate? Did you know that the president's Middle East advisor was in Moscow on this thread while you were, as director of the CIA, participating in this thread? Were you aware of that? Are you aware of that today?
I'm not aware of that today.
This sloppiness, this incompetence, this disrespect for our intelligence agencies and the personnel who work for them is entirely unacceptable. It's an embarrassment.
Senator?
You need to do better. You need to do better. Thank you. I'm being gavelled by the chairman, and I apologize for going over my time.
Senator Young.
Thank you all for being here. I'll be asking some follow-up questions, clarifications about this Signal episode in a closed setting, and try and work with all of you to bring clarity to that situation. It appears to me there's some unanswered questions. It'll take some time, I think, to get there in a more dispassionate setting. Director Gabbard, I'm going to begin today asking you some questions about emerging technology. This has been a real point of emphasis, I know, of our broader national security community for a period of time. We know that PRC is making generational investments in certain emerging tech, AI, biotech, and other areas of technology to reduce their vulnerability against any supply chain disruptions and to lead the world in some areas. As the IC assesses, the PRC is seeking to, quote, become a global S&T superpower, surpass the United States, promote self-reliance, and achieve further economic, political, and military gain. So, Director Gabbard, can you describe the actions China is taking to operationalize that IC assessment in ways that directly target the security and prosperity of everyday Americans?
Senator, what we know is that they are trying to use these capabilities as a means to continue to exploit vulnerabilities within our own critical infrastructure and our cyber technology. The critical infrastructure is a key area of concern given what we know has already been exploited, these asymmetric attacks that have been placed within our critical infrastructure that are of serious concern given how they could be exploited, especially during a time of conflict. We know that they are experiencing a boom in their generative AI capability and are competing very heavily against our own AI capabilities. Obviously, AI can and will be used across a multitude of every sector of our society, both here as we are in our own country, and we expect China to be able to continue to do the same there.
So two key areas of vulnerability to the United States, conceivably, susceptibility to cyber attacks, and as China's leveraging of AI towards misinformation, increasingly into the physical realm, they can pose threats to us as well. As follow-up, Director Ratcliffe, you know, we've had Huawei, we've had TikTok. What do you believe will be the next point of technological friction and competition between the U.S. and China? What should members of Congress be looking for?
Senator, I think I can answer this question more fully in the classified setting. What I would say is it relates to the issue of emerging technologies and matters of quantum computing and quantum sensing. and our ability to stay ahead of China on the technological curve with respect to those issues. I'd be happy to get into that in further detail in a classified setting.
Excellent. We'll dive into that. Director Haw, General, how do you see biotech playing into this broader competition?
I think it's an area that, from our perspective, has increasingly been a priority as we want to understand the approach that China's taken, and also to ensure that as we think about the president's priorities in terms of both economic and technology security, we are certainly, as a community, following DNI's guidance, that we are increasingly putting our resources to be able to ensure that we understand where China is investing in those resources and how that will impact our economy and overall the overall health of our national security.
Thank you, General. Director Gabbard, not a lot of time left on this end, but I do have a little crypto interest I wanted to communicate to you. Can you share with this committee how we're positioned to disrupt foreign cyber efforts to steal cryptocurrency, such as the North Koreans have successfully done? If others would like to pull this thread and weigh in on this question very briefly, that would be great.
Senator, we're obviously aware of North Korea's revenue generating by stealing cryptocurrency has had a significant effect on North Korea's capabilities. I defer to our technical experts on the actions that are being taken.
Senator, I think this would be a great topic when we go to closed session.
It's going to be a busy closed
Agreed.
setting. Yes. Director Patel?
I agree with the general. In closed session, I can provide some details.
It's what you get when you visit with a bunch of spies. All right, Chairman.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to come back to the topic of the day here, the signal chain as reported by The Atlantic. Ms. Gabbard and Mr. Ratcliffe, you each testified that there was no information operational in nature, no classified information. So I want to ask each of you just a series of, just respond yes or no. I'll start with Ms. Gabbard. In the signal chain that we have been talking about, was there any mention of a target in Yemen?
I don't remember mention of specific targets.
Any generic target?
I believe there was discussion around targets in general.
Mr. Ratcliffe?
I think that's consistent with my recollection. Again, I don't have access to that.
Was there any mention, Ms. Gabbard, of a weapon or weapons system?
I don't recall specific weapons systems being named.
I'm not talking about specific, any weapon or weapons system.
I don't recall specific names of systems or weapons being used or named within the
Well, I'm not asking whether, I don't want you to tell me what the specific weapon was, but any weapon at all. Mr. Ratcliffe, same question.
I don't recall.
How about anything about timing? Ms. Gabbard?
I don't recall specific timing.
Was there any mention?
I won't get into the detail of the conversation, but obviously there was a significant amount of planning and internal discussions that had occurred prior to and outside of this signal chat.
Mr. Ratcliffe, you're nodding your head. Any mention of any military unit whatsoever? Mr. Ratcliffe?
Not that I recall.
Ms. Gabbard?
Not that I recall.
Okay, so I understand that DoD policy prohibits discussion of even what is called controlled unclassified information, or CUI, on unsecured devices. Are both of you aware of that DoD policy?
I haven't read that policy.
Not familiar with the DoD policy, but I would say that the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority for DoD in deciding what would be classified information.
Ms. Gabbard, does the intelligence community have a policy that prohibits discussion of controlled, unclassified information?
Yes.
It does. Okay. Controlled, unclassified information, according to DOD, includes information that has not been approved for public release. Would you, of what's been disclosed publicly of the signal chain, would either of you feel that that would be approved for public release? Ms. Gabbard.
The discussion that took place in that Signal chat group was a conversation reflecting national security leaders and the vice president around the president's objectives.
So yes or no, would you approve that for public release?
I don't feel I can answer that question here.
Because of the nature of this hearing?
Because of the nature of a private discussion that took place between individual leaders in our government.
It would make sense that you would not approve it for public release, wouldn't it?
There are other factors that would go into that consideration.
Mr. Ratcliffe, yes or no?
I wouldn't approve the release of classified information. Again, as I've said, my
I'm not talking about
understanding is
classified information, Mr. Ratcliffe. I'm talking about information that has not been approved for public release. That is information that is considered controlled, unclassified information.
The principles that would have been on that would have been individuals capable of approving that for public release.
I got 20 seconds. The deliberation as to whether or not we should launch a strike on another country, would you consider that classified information, Ms. Gabbard?
Well, the information was not classified.
I'm not talking about this. I'm just talking about deliberation from principles as to whether or not we should launch a strike on another country. Would you consider that classified information? I'm not talking about what happened this week.
There are other factors that would go into determining that classification.
Mr. Ratcliffe, the deliberation between principals in our national security apparatus about whether or not to strike another country, would you consider that to be classified information?
Pre-decisional strike deliberation should be conducted through classified channels.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I may, I just want to return, Mr. Ratcliffe, to your answer there in part, Senator Kelly. It's been raised at several occasions now in this hearing about whether classified information was discussed in this chat. And you mentioned about the Secretary of Defense being what you called, I think, the original classification authority.
Correct. Correct.
I think it's important for the public to understand that although you and Director Gabbard are original classification authorities on many matters, you're not that for all matters that might be classified in the government. Is that right?
That's correct.
So if the Secretary of State has classified sensitive diplomatic details, that's his authority. If the Secretary of Energy has sensitive classified information about our national laboratories, that's his authority. And the two of you can't speak to other departments who have their own original classification authority, and which, of course, as Director Gabbard said, ultimately rested with one person, the President of the United States. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. It looks like the Vice Chairman wants to weigh in as well.
Just very briefly. I mean, I think it strains the audience and the watching public's credibility if we're talking about timing, packages, that somehow this would be okay to put out, or just, frankly, senior American officials trashing Europe. I've been around this for a while. This is not information you generally put out. And the notion there's not even acknowledgement of, hey, gosh, we screwed up, is stunning to me. And the idea somehow, well, none of this was classified, but we can't talk about it here. You can't have it both ways.
I think the witness's point is that they can't speak for every official in the government who has original classification authority.
Chairman, I don't, that's not what I'm not trying to litigate that. I'm trying to litigate on the face, unless as Senator Bennett said, this reporter is somehow making this all up. And I think the White House has acknowledged that the text chain that he submitted was authentic. It strains my mind to think, again, it strains my mind if the shoe had been on the other foot, what my colleagues would be saying about this. And again, we're going to get to the bottom of it. And I appreciate your comments, but you guys have both testified under law. There's nothing classified in that information. There's nothing, in a sense, I've not heard either one of you say, gosh, we screwed up. So we'll find out. This is too important to our national security. And again, I know we've got more members to close.
They testified, is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's no intelligence community classified information. Is that correct?
That's
Director
correct.
Ratcliffe, is that correct? Director Gabbard?
Yes, Chairman.
Well, again.
That's not correct. She said repeatedly there's nothing classified. Period.
Right, period. You can't have it both. And again, we'll see. I cannot believe this is not going to come out. And if it's not classified, again, we'd ask you to give it to the public today. I'm sure one of your aides back there probably got it on paper. If you got it here, it's not classified, stand by your position. Or is this just one more example of a careless approach to how we keep our secrets in this administration?
With apologies to Senator Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I want to explore a little bit about Ukraine, and I'll direct this to Director Ratcliffe or Director Cruz. The ATA assesses that, quote, the grinding war of attrition in Ukraine, quote, will lead to a gradual but steady erosion of Kyiv's positions on the battlefield. Are Ukrainian forces at any significant risk of collapse this year?
Before I turn it over to Director Ratcliffe, I think both sides are working through the equipment that they need, the industrial base they need to support that, and the personnel that are required to man all of that equipment and man the front lines. And as we see the battle space in the various portions, whether it's in Kursk, whether it's in any of the 4 oblasts, we see areas where Kyiv will struggle to prevent the slow attritional grind. We do not see an imminent collapse in any of the line of control battle spaces at this point.
And then vice versa. That answers my question, unless you want to add something, Director. Whatever advantages in manpower and material they have, can Russia maintain its operational tempo without significant changes to how it's conducting the war?
I think our assessment from a military perspective is that Russia has the ability to sustain its campaign longer than Kyiv would. Now, when that timeline hits, we do not have an assessment of, but I believe that if this were to go on for more than the remainder of this year, both sides would have a significant challenge maintaining their defense industrial base as well as their operational ops tempo.
Longer than this year?
That is correct, and they will each have difficulty at various points throughout the spring, summer, and fall as well.
Thank you. Director Ratcliffe, ATA says continuing the Russia-Ukraine war perpetuates strategic risks to the United States of unintended escalation to large-scale war and heightened insecurity among NATO allies. What are the strategic risks to the United States if Russia were to achieve its maximalist objectives via peace agreement?
Achieve via peace agreement?
Yes.
Well, I think that clearly the negotiations that are going on reflect that President Trump is seeking a cessation of the war on terms that will end the war permanently. From an intelligence community standpoint, and specifically with regard to CIA assets, we've taken steps to support that, the president's goal of an enduring peace. To General Cruz's comments, I agree with his assessment and generally the public assessment that Russia has the battlefield advantage, is grinding forward slowly. I want to comment on that, however, to say that with regard to the Ukrainian resistance, the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military have been underestimated for a period of several years now. And ultimately, I'm convinced from my reflections in observing from an intelligence standpoint that they will fight with their bare hands if they have to, if they don't have terms that are acceptable to an enduring peace. Obviously, to the point of maximalist goals, President Trump has communicated that he is aware of the dangers of that, of Russia getting what they want. And I think that the peace talks that are taking place would reflect, if successful, and they are making progress, that both sides would not get everything that they want and no one's maximalist goals would be achieved.
Thank you both. In the short time I have, I'm going to skip a question and ask that I intended to ask, but ask the director of the FBI. Director, I chair the subcommittee that appropriates money for the Department of Justice, including the FBI. It has been our practice that the FBI director as well as the Attorney General appear before our committee each year. And I want to make certain that you do not foresee any challenges that I will have in your presence when you come to speak when we invite you to come speak about your budget. I think when we visited in the office, you made yourself often available, pleased to talk to Congress. We're getting ready for the appropriations process to begin. The budget that the president intends to submit is seemingly months away, weeks away, long weeks away. And we may ask you to come testify about your priorities now or sooner than that. Is that a challenge for you that I'd be aware of?
From the FBI, no, as long as the Department of Justice and the Attorney General are good with it.
Thank you.
Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director Ratcliffe, you have repeatedly made the point that there was no classified information contained in any of these discussions that were reported in the Atlantic Monthly. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. So, Senator, what I've related is that any information that was related from my perspective or that I observed from the intelligence perspective was not classified information. With respect to the assertions and the allegations that there was strike packages or targeting information or things that relate to DOD, as I've pointed out, the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority for determining whether something's classified or not. And as I've understood from media reports, the Secretary of Defense has said the information was not classified.
Are you aware that the Secretary of Defense declassified this information prior to the discussion?
I'm not.
Director Gabbard, same question. You've indicated, at least the impression I got, was that there was no classified information discussed. Is that correct?
Senator, my answer is the same as the director of the CIA's.
So the question has to be posed to Secretary Hegseth whether he declassified the information and at what point he did declassify it. Do you agree?
Yes, I defer questions to the Secretary of Defense.
Okay. Director Patel, are you conducting an investigation of these discussions and activities?
Thank you, Senator. As I informed the vice chairman on the same question, I found out about this late last night, early this morning, so I don't have an update for you on that.
Well, thank you. When you get an update, we'd appreciate it very much.
Yes, sir.
Director Gabbard, were you overseas during any parts of these discussions?
Yes, Senator, I was.
Were you using your private phone or a public phone for the signal discussions?
I won't speak to this because it's under review by the National Security Council. Once that review is complete, I'm sure we'll share the results with the committee.
What is under review? It's a very simple question. Are you your private phone or an officially issued phone? What could be under review?
National Security Council is reviewing all aspects of how this came to be, how the journalist was inadvertently added to the group chat, and what occurred within that chat across the board.
But so you were not going to disclose anything about whether you use the phone. Director Ratcliffe, there's been indication that the CIA has warned recently retired personnel about the vulnerabilities of Signal and other encrypted messaging applications. If that's the case, why were you discussing these issues on Signal?
Senator, Signal use, as I've said repeatedly, is permissible for work purposes. I've never said that end-to-end encryption apps like Signal are a substitute for classified systems. And I was not discussing classified information in this setting.
But as you've indicated previously, perhaps the Secretary of Defense was discussing classified information, and only he can be held accountable in terms of whether it was classified or declassified at the point when he spoke. Is that accurate?
Well, I didn't say it that way. I said the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority, and my understanding is that his comments are that any information that he shared was not classified.
But you have no way to verify that?
I don't.
Again, this is a very troubling example and a great lapse in our intelligence and our discussion. One further point, if you are not aware of any classified information on the discussions back and forth, would it be appropriate for the author to release the entire text of what he heard or transcribed?
I think the author has released, my understanding, essentially almost all of the information as it's been related to me. I don't know what calculation the author made with regard to what information would be released or not.
Well,
but again, I can again confirm that with respect to the communications that were related, as to me, there was no classified information.
According to the article, quote, the message contained information that might be interpreted as related to actual and current intelligence operations, and the author did not disclose that information. So the question would be, if he disclosed everything he heard, in your view.
That wouldn't be classified information. I know the context of what that is, and I think the author said might be interpreted as related to intelligence information. It was not classified information.
So it goes back to my point. If he released all this information he did not release, he could do so without any liability at the federal level.
I think you're asking for a legal answer that I'm not able to give you, but.
Mr. Patel, can you opine? You're a lawyer and you're the director of the FBI. Would he face any legal liability if he released the information?
Because of the questions you and the vice chairman have put to me, I'm not going to prejudge the situation, and that legal call is ultimately for the Department of Justice.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for joining us and for your service. Just to make sure I understand some of the basics here, so Director Ratcliffe, you were a member of the Houthi PC small group signal chain, correct?
I was.
Yeah, and so were the Vice President, the Secretaries of State and Defense, the National Security Advisor, and Ms. Gabbard, correct?
I believe so. I don't have a list of who was invited to be on.
And so was national political reporter Jeffrey Goldberg, correct?
I don't know that.
Yes, you do.
I don't know Jeffrey Goldberg, and I've already testified. I don't know whether or how he was added.
Okay, well, he was a member of the signal chain, and the discussion included the Vice President's private opinion on the wisdom of proposed U.S. strikes in Yemen, correct?
I don't recall.
Vance, quote, I think we are making a mistake. I am not sure the President is aware of how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There was a strong argument for delaying this a month. You don't recall?
I don't, as you
don't recall seeing that?
Read that. I don't.
It included the private opinions of the Secretary of Defense on the timing of strikes in Yemen, correct?
I don't recall.
Director Ratcliffe, surely you prepared for this hearing today. You were part of a group of principals, senior echelons of the U.S. government, in now a widely publicized breach of sensitive information. You don't recall whether the Vice President opined on the wisdom of the strikes? That's your testimony today under oath?
In that setting, I don't recall.
Here's what Secretary Hegseth said, quote, waiting a few weeks or months does not fundamentally change the calculus. Two immediate risks on waiting. One, this leaks and we look indecisive. Two, Israel takes an action first or Gaza ceasefire falls apart. and we don't get to start this on our own terms. Your testimony is you don't recall the Secretary of Defense sending that message or reading it?
I recall there being an exchange. I don't recall the specifics as you're reading it.
Well, let's put it this way, Director Ratcliffe, a discussion by senior U.S. officials on the timing and risks of a proposed military campaign and disagreements between the President and the Vice President about U.S. plans and intentions would be of obvious interest to foreign intelligence services, would it not?
Yes.
And they were discussing the timing of sending U.S. air crews into enemy airspace where they faced an air defense threat, correct?
I'm going to, Senator, defer to the other principles that you're referring to about what the meaning and the context of
They're
what they
talking
were
about the
auditing.
timing of U.S. airstrikes, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and therefore the timing of sending U.S. air crews into hostile airspace, correct?
Yes.
And therefore the time period during which enemy air defenses could target U.S. air crews flying in enemy airspace, correct?
I don't know that.
You do know that. Let me ask this question, General Hawk. You lead America's signals intelligence collection. Would the private deliberation of foreign senior officials about the wisdom and timing of potential military action be a collection priority for you and the U.S. intelligence community?
Senator, it's our job to do indications and warning for both the plans and intentions of adversary leaders and for military commanders.
And would not information about the timing of airstrikes allow a military to pre-position or cue air defense systems to shoot down enemy aircraft?
I think, Senator, from our perspective, any advance warning is something that we certainly are trying to protect.
Yeah. Director Ratcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
No.
A national political...
Hold on.
No, you
Let
hold
me
on.
answer.
No, Director
The
Ratcliffe,
reason
I
I
asked
say
you a yes
no-
or no question, and now you'll hold on. A national political reporter
you can characterize it how you want.
Was made privy
The White
to
House has
sensitive
made
information
clear
about
that there
imminent
was an
military
inadvertent
operations against a
mistake,
foreign terrorist
an inadvertent
organization.
mistake of adding a reporter.
And that wasn't a huge
to a
mistake?
seal.
That wasn't a huge mistake?
Well, I think they characterize
This is
it
an
as a
embarrassment.
mistake.
This is utterly unprofessional. There's been no apology. There has been no recognition of the gravity of this error. And by the way, we will get the full transcript of this chain, and your testimony will be measured carefully against its content. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the witnesses again for their appearance today. I sense the Vice Chairman has something to add.
I do.
So I will recognize him briefly.
Well, again, I thank the witnesses. But what you're saying doesn't make sense on the face of it. Everybody knows, at least Director Ratcliffe, you had the courtesy of acknowledging you were on the chain. Director Gabbard wouldn't even touch that, even though we've got our initials. And if you want a comparison, think back to the beginning of the Ukraine war, when the United States, in concert with our then ally, the United Kingdom, declassified a lot of Putin's battle plans that allowed the Ukrainians to push back successfully on the Russian invasion. How was that? That was gone through a real process of declassification. As Senator Ossoff so clearly made the point, this information out, potentially where our adversary could reposition its defenses, in the unwillingness of the individuals on this panel who are on the chat to even apologize or acknowledging what a colossal screw up this is, speaks volumes.
Thank you to our witnesses for your appearance. A few administrative matters. As I mentioned earlier, Senator Collins is under the weather. She regrets that she could not be here for your testimony. Senator Risch likewise had to preside over a hearing of the Foreign Relations Committee to include the nomination of my former governor, Mike Huckabee, a great American and a great friend of Israel, to be the next ambassador to Israel. He also regrets that he could not be here. I anticipate he may have written questions as well. I would urge you all to respond to those promptly. Now, the audience will remain seated while our witnesses and their aides depart the hearing room. The Capitol Police will ensure this occurs. I want to commend the Capitol Police and our committee security staff for running an orderly hearing today. For the benefit of members, the vote on the floor has been called. We will adjourn this open hearing and we will reconvene in closed setting at 12:40 p.m. The hearing is adjourned.
Once again, good morning, everyone. Without objection, the chair may declare the committee in recess at any time. Before we begin today's hearing, I want to provide a few important reminders. First, today's open portion is being broadcast live on C-SPAN and streamed on the committee's YouTube channel. This open portion of the hearing will be conducted entirely on an unclassified basis. All participants are reminded to refrain from discussing classified or other sensitive information protected from public disclosure. I will adjourn this open session following completion of one round of questions, and we will then move into closed session where such questions can be asked. Second, I want to inform the audience that while I fully support constitutionally protected free speech and the right to assemble, this is not the time or place. Any would-be disruptors in the audience who interfere with the committee's business will not be tolerated. For this event, members will have 5 minutes with witnesses. I would ask each of my colleagues to keep both your questions and complete answers from the witnesses within those allotted 5 minutes. Any last questions that can't be answered in time will be submitted for the record. In the same manner in which the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has conducted itself in recent worldwide threats hearings, I expect that we will continue to act in a bipartisan and respectful manner during today's event. I'm confident all members can treat each of our witnesses today with due respect, consistent with past practice. This worldwide threats hearing provides the American people the opportunity to hear directly from our intelligence community leadership on the threats that face our nation. It's my pleasure to welcome our witnesses to today's hearing. Director of National Intelligence, the Honorable Tulsi Gabbard. Director of Central Intelligence Agency, the Honorable John Ratcliffe. Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Honorable Kash Patel. Director of National Security Agency, General Tim Hawk. Director of Defense Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General Jeffrey Cruz. Thank you all for being here. First, I want to address an issue that was made public earlier this week regarding a group text message exchange that included several members of President Trump's national security leadership team and a journalist. Yesterday, our colleagues on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence held their hearing on the annual threat assessment, and unfortunately, instead of exploring the real and existential threats that face our nation, which is the purpose of this hearing, this issue consumed most of their time. While I will address this topic further in my questions, it's my sincere hope that we use this hearing to discuss the many foreign threats facing our nation. I have deep concerns about the state of our national security. The war between Russia and Ukraine has just surpassed 3 years and now includes North Korean troops on the battlefield. Iran remains the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, supporting terrorist organizations throughout the Middle East like Hezbollah and Hamas, fueling the latter's war with Israel and Gaza. The threat of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has metastasized worldwide, expanding a robust military and espionage capability well beyond the Pacific, including here within the Western Hemisphere. The CCP's aggressiveness in operations below the level of armed conflict continues to grow. For example, they have sponsored cyber attacks against United States critical infrastructure and even recruited a New York State governor's office employee into being an undisclosed agent of the CCP. And after 4 years of a catastrophic open border policy and limited and in many cases no vetting, we have seen an explosion of illegal migrants crossing our border since 2021. In fiscal year 2024, 516 were identified to be known or suspected terrorists, 106 of whom tried to sneak into our country between ports of entry. And these are just the ones we caught of the nearly 3 million encounters recorded by Customs and Border Protection. We've also seen an ISIS-affiliated human smuggling network bringing more than 400 migrants into the United States. And this occurs through networks associated with cartels and gangs from Sinaloa to CJ&G, who present an unacceptable risk to the security of the American people. In the midst of such threats, many have understandably lost trust in the intelligence community. One reason I'm particularly concerned about is a pattern of lapses I've seen in analytic integrity and objectivity in some of the assessments provided by the IC in the last few years. From President Trump-Russia collusion fiasco to the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic to anomalous health incidents, there have been numerous instances of the IC suppressing certain reporting, using substandard reporting to support a pre-decided thesis, and failure or refusal to consider plausible alternative analyses. That, combined with many other examples of weaponized government, results in a situation where the United States is facing very real threats, while many of our citizens lack trust in those they empower to inform on or counter these threats. Look, I've been honored to serve our country for many years now, first as an explosive ordnance disposal technician in the Army, now as a representative for the 1st District of Arkansas and chairman of this committee. In my time here, I've traveled the world and met with countless IC employees, from everyday Americans doing challenging and often dangerous work of intelligence to agencies directors like yourselves. The vast majority of those people are honest, hardworking, patriotic Americans that silently and without accolades do difficult jobs, often in austere places, sacrificing time with their families and in some cases putting themselves in danger, all in order to serve the United States. These silent warriors deserve our gratitude and our respect. They do not deserve to have their reputations besmirched by poor leadership. Unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen instances of politicized, self-serving, dishonest leaders sustaining the reputation of our institutions and patriots by abusing the powers and sacred trust given to them by the American people. We have some real work to do. You in your roles as leaders of prestigious organizations and us as members of this committee charged with conducting honest and rigorous oversight must ensure that our institutions work for the American people. Those that don't uphold the stringent standards of integrity that the American people expect and deserve must be held accountable. In the instances where trust is breached, those involved must be held accountable. This will help rebuild the trust between the American people and those that serve them in the intelligence community. Today, we need you to be candid about the threats facing the United States. I have deep concerns that many threats have been downplayed or not taken seriously enough for some time, particularly in the homeland and the Western Hemisphere. I look forward to hearing your assessment. Thank you again to our witnesses for being here today, and with that, I want to yield to the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Himes, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning and welcome to our witnesses. As the chairman said, this hearing is an important opportunity for our committee and the American people to hear directly from the senior leadership of the intelligence community about the threats that our nation faces. I read the unclassified report and I found a lot of continuity in the IC's assessment about critical threats to our national security compared to last year's assessment. The IC continues to see threats from our principal adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I must say, though, that after these last 2 months, I'm worried that the call may be coming from inside the House. This report calls Russia, and I quote, an enduring potential threat to U.S. power, presence, and global interests. But as far as I can tell, we're now on Team Kremlin. We vote with them and against our allies in the United Nations. We humiliate President Zelensky in the Oval Office. The president's chief Russian negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is repeating Russian talking points and participating on a madcap signal chat about an attack on Yemen while inside Russia. USAID is gone, and with it, all American soft power. If I had time, I would ask the generals at this table about what it means to our national security to give up our soft power. We're no longer helping struggling nations in Africa. China, or worse, terrorists, are filling the vacuum. I wonder how many of those African countries will be named in next year's threat assessment. Thanks to DOJ, the men we paid to guard the most vicious ISIS terrorists in the world in Syria walked off the job. Do you think we'll see their names in this document next year? Elon Musk fired the people who maintain our nuclear weapons. Does that feel like a threat to you? Apparently, all of this mayhem is cheered by the President of the United States and by 20-somethings with laptops and nicknames like Big Balls. But I've been doing this for a long time, and I know that Moscow and Beijing and Tehran and Pyongyang cannot believe their luck. Now we come to learn that people in the most dangerous and sensitive jobs on the planet put extremely specific pre-decisional discussions about a military attack on signal, which could be intercepted by the Russians and the Chinese. Everyone here knows that the Russians or the Chinese could have gotten all of that information, and they could have passed it on to the Houthis, who easily could have repositioned weapons and altered their plans to knock down planes or sink ships. I think that it's by the awesome grace of God that we are not mourning dead pilots right now. The two general officers sitting at the table and the people who work for all of you know that if they had set up and participated in the signal chat, they would be gone. And they know that there's only one response to a mistake of this magnitude. You apologize, you own it, and you stop everything until you can figure out what went wrong and how it might not ever happen again. But that's not what happened. The Secretary of Defense responded with a brutal attack on the reporter who did not ask to be on the signal chain. Yesterday, our former colleague Mike Waltz did the same in the White House and then went on Fox to call Jeff Goldberg a loser. What do you think the people who work for you are seeing and learning from that? Now, except for that last part, almost all of the mayhem slowly eroding our safety, our standing, and our security in the world has largely happened outside the IC. If you had a part in that, and I suspect you did, I thank you. I'll say it now and I'll say it again every time we see each other over the next couple of years. You must protect the thousands of patriots who go to work every day under you to keep us safe. You need to go to work every day thinking about their morale, their well-being, and their protection. I've done intelligence oversight for more than a decade. It's my job to ask you the tough questions and maybe even make you uncomfortable. But John, I don't ever walk through your lobby and look at those 140 stars on the wall without choking up over the fact that men and women far better than I will give their lives to keep us safe. There's about a dozen people in this room who know all their stories, and you know and I know that many of the men and women who have stars on that wall died because of bad decisions or poor judgment by their leaders. We've all worked together before, and recent events notwithstanding, we need you to succeed. Your people and our safety requires you to succeed. I really hope you do. But let me say now that if some overcaffeinated 20-year-old succeeds in firing your linguists or your mathematicians or your paramilitary officers, if you shut down some unit because Steve Bannon or Seb Gorka doesn't like it, America will be less safe and people will get hurt. And I and this committee and history will be very unkind.
Gentleman yields. Now recognize Director Gabbard to make a statement on behalf of the intelligence community.
Thank you very much, Chairman Crawford and Ranking Member Himes. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity for us to be here to present the 2025 Annual Threat Assessment. I'm joined here by my colleagues from the CIA, DIA, FBI, and NSA. Our testimony today offers the collective assessment of the 18 U.S. intelligence elements making up the U.S. intelligence community and draws on the intelligence collection and information available to the IC from open source and private sector and the expertise of our analysts. It evaluates what the IC assesses most threatens our people and our nation's ability to live in a peaceful, free, secure, and prosperous society. As you know very well, we face an increasingly complex threat environment that is threatening us here at home and our interests abroad. I'll begin by focusing on what most immediately and directly threatens the United States and the well-being of the American people: the non-state criminal groups and terrorists putting American lives and livelihood at risk. I'll then move on to focus on the key nation states who have the capability to threaten our security and the interests of the United States. Cartels, gangs, and other transnational criminal organizations in our part of the world are engaging in a wide array of illicit activity, from narcotics trafficking to money laundering, to smuggling of illegal immigrants and human trafficking, which endanger the health, welfare, and safety of everyday Americans. Based on our latest reporting available for the year-long period ending October 2024, cartels were largely responsible for the deaths of more than 54,000 American citizens due to synthetic opioids. Mexico-based transnational criminal organizations are the main suppliers of illicit fentanyl to the U.S. market and are quickly adapting to enforcement and regulatory pressures by using multiple sources and methods to procure precursor chemicals and equipment, primarily from China and India, many of which are dual-use chemicals used in legitimate industries. Independent fentanyl producers are also increasingly fragmenting the drug trade in Mexico. The ready availability of precursor chemicals and ease of making illicit fentanyl have enabled independent actors to increase illicit fentanyl production and smuggling operations in Mexico. Cartels are profiting from human trafficking and have likely facilitated more than 2 million illegal immigrants encountered by law enforcement at the U.S. southwest border in 2024 alone, straining our vital resources and putting the American people at risk. Criminal groups drive much of the unrest and lawlessness in the Western Hemisphere. They also engage in extortion, weapons and human smuggling, and other illicit and dangerous revenue-seeking operations, including kidnapping for ransom, forced labor, and sex trafficking. While some of these key drivers of migrants are expected to persist, heightened U.S. border security enforcement and deportations under the Trump administration are proving to serve as a deterrent for migrants seeking to illegally cross our borders. U.S. Border Patrol apprehensions along the southwest border in January 2025 dropped 85% from the same period in 2024. Transnational Islamist extremists such as ISIS and al-Qaeda and affiliated jihadi groups continue to pursue, enable, or inspire attacks against the United States and our citizens abroad and within the homeland to advance their ultimate objective of establishing a global Islamist caliphate. This includes heightened efforts to spread their ideology to recruit and radicalize individuals in the U.S. and the West. While the New Year's Day attacker in New Orleans had no known direct contact with ISIS terrorists, he was influenced and radicalized by ISIS ideological propaganda, as one example. Al-Qaeda and its affiliates continue to call for attacks against the United States as they conduct attacks overseas. These jihadist groups have shown their ability to adapt and evolve, including using new technology and tactics to spread their ideology and recruit new followers. A range of non-state cyber criminals are also targeting our economic interests, our critical infrastructure, and advanced commercial capability for extortion, other coercive pursuits, and financial gain. These actors are using a variety of tactics, including phishing, ransomware, and denial of service attacks to disrupt our systems and steal sensitive and lucrative information, using available technologies and taking advantage of U.S. cyber vulnerabilities. Ransomware actors last year, for example, attacked the largest payment processor for U.S. healthcare institutions, and another set of criminal actors conducted cyber attacks against U.S. water utilities. Some of these non-state cyber actors also operate as proxies for or emulate similar activities being carried out by major state actors. The IC sees China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea engaging in activities that could challenge U.S. capabilities and interests, especially related to our security and economy. They are in some cases working together in different areas to target U.S. interests and to protect themselves from U.S. sanctions. At this point, the IC assesses that China is our most capable strategic competitor. Under the leadership of Xi Jinping, the People's Republic of China seeks to position itself as a leading power in the world stage, economically, technologically, and militarily. Beijing is driven in part by a belief that Washington is pursuing a broad effort to contain China's rise and undermine CCP rule. China's most serious domestic challenge is probably China's slowing economy and the potential instability that could occur if socioeconomic grievances lead to large-scale unrest. Growing economic tensions with the United States and other countries could also weigh on China's plans for economic growth and domestic job creation. China's military is fielding advanced capabilities, including hypersonic weapons, stealth aircraft, advanced submarines, stronger space and cyber warfare assets, and a larger arsenal of nuclear weapons. While it appears they would like to develop and maintain positive ties with the United States and the Trump administration to advance its own interests and avoid conflict, China is building its military capability in part to gain an advantage in the event of a military conflict with the United States around the issue of China's efforts towards unification with the Republic of China or Taiwan. Beijing is advancing its cyber capabilities for sophisticated operations aimed at stealing sensitive U.S. government and private sector information and pre-positioning additional asymmetric attack options that may be deployed in a conflict. China's cyber activities have been linked to multiple high-profile breaches, including last year's massive compromise of U.S. telecom infrastructure, commonly referred to as Salt Typhoon. Beijing currently dominates global markets and strategically important supply chains, for example, with the mining and processing of several critical minerals. In December, China imposed an export ban to the United States on gallium, germanium, and antimony, all of which are important to the production of semiconductors and our defense technologies. This was in direct response to U.S. export controls on chips designed to broadly limit PRC access to advanced chips and chip-making equipment. China also aims to compete in other critical global industries, including AI, legacy semiconductor chip production, biomanufacturing and genetic sequencing, and medical and pharmaceutical supply production. Russia's nuclear and conventional military capabilities, along with its demonstrated economic and military resilience, make it a formidable competitor. Moscow has more nuclear weapons than any other nation that could inflict catastrophic damage on the United States and the world in the event of a major war that Russian leaders feared put them and their regime at serious risk. In late 2024, Russia announced updates to its public nuclear doctrine, expanding the conditions under which Russia would consider using nuclear weapons. Russia is building a more modern and survivable nuclear force designed to circumvent U.S. missile defense through reliable retaliatory strike potential. It intends to deter the U.S. by holding the U.S. homeland at risk and by having the capabilities to threaten nuclear war in a conflict. Russia's developed advanced cyber capabilities and has attempted to pre-position access to U.S. critical infrastructure for asymmetric options and make it a persistent cyber threat. Russia's cyber activities have been linked to multiple high-profile breaches, including the 2023 hack of Microsoft. Russia is also fielding new capabilities in anti-satellite weapons meant to degrade U.S. and allied space infrastructure. Among Russia's most concerning developments is a new satellite intended to carry a nuclear weapon as an anti-satellite weapon, violating long-standing international law against such activity and putting the U.S. and global economy at risk. Iran continues to seek to expand its influence in the Middle East, despite the degradation to its proxies and defenses during the Gaza conflict. Iran has developed and maintains ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and UAVs, including systems capable of striking U.S. targets and allies in the region. They've shown a willingness to use these weapons, including during a 2020 attack on U.S. forces in Iraq and in attacks against Israel in April and October 2024. Iran's cyber operations and capabilities also present a serious threat to U.S. networks and data. The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. We continue to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program. In the past year, we've seen an erosion of a decades-long taboo in Iran on discussing nuclear weapons in public, likely emboldening nuclear weapons advocates within Iran's decision-making apparatus. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is at its highest levels and is unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons. Iran will likely continue efforts to counter Israel and press for a U.S. military withdrawal from the region by aiding, arming, and helping to reconstitute its loose consortium of like-minded terrorist actors, which it refers to as its axis of resistance. Although weakened, this collection of actors still presents a wide range of threats, including to Israel's population and U.S. forces deployed in Iraq and Syria, as well as U.S. and international military and commercial shipping and transit. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is pursuing stronger strategic and conventional capabilities that can target U.S. forces and allies in the region, as well as the U.S. homeland, to bolster North Korea's leverage and stature, defend its regime, and achieve at least tacit recognition as a nuclear weapons power. Kim's recently cemented strategic partnership with Russia supports these goals by providing him with greater financial, military, and diplomatic support, reducing its reliance on China, and providing North Korean forces and weapons systems with warfighting experience. Kim views his strategic weapons advances, its deepening ties with Russia, and its economic durability as strengthening his negotiating position against Washington's demands for denuclearization and lessening Kim's need for sanctions relief. Since 2022, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have grown closer. Removing the accelerant of the war in Ukraine is unlikely to revert these bilateral relationships to a pre-war 2021 baseline, leaving room for new strategic priorities and world events to create new incentives or challenges to their expanded cooperation. Russia has been a catalyst for much of this expansion, driven heavily by the support it has needed for its war against Ukraine, including protection from U.S. and Western sanctions. In addition to exchange of military and other resource capabilities with North Korea, Russia has relied more heavily on China's financial and defense industry backing and has increased combined military exercises with China. With Iran, Russia has also expanded financial ties to mitigate sanctions. Iran has become a critical military supplier to Russia, especially of UAVs, in exchange for Russian technical support for Iranian weapons, intelligence, and advanced cyber capabilities. The threats that we see to the U.S. to U.S. national security are both complex and multifaceted. In closing, I want to address briefly the signal chat issue that I know many of you are concerned about. The President and National Security Advisor Waltz held a press conference yesterday with a clear message. It was a mistake that a reporter was inadvertently added to a signal chat with high-level national security principals having a policy discussion about imminent strikes against the Houthis and the effects of the strike. The National Security Advisor has taken full responsibility for this, and the National Security Council is conducting an in-depth review along with technical experts working to determine how this reporter was inadvertently added to this chat. The conversation was candid and sensitive, but as the President and National Security Advisor stated, no classified information was shared. There were no sources, methods, locations, or war plans that were shared. This was a standard update to the National Security Cabinet that was provided alongside updates that were given to foreign partners in the region. The Signal Message app comes pre-installed on government devices. In December of 2024, CISA stated, quote, "We strongly urge highly targeted individuals to immediately review and apply best practices provided in the guidance to protect mobile communications, including consistent use of end-to-end encryption." And they named Signal as an app as an example of such an end-to-end encrypted messaging app. Ideally, these conversations occur in person. However, at times, fast-moving coordination of an unclassified nature is necessary where in-person conversation is not an option. I'm also aware that a lawsuit was filed yesterday on this issue. As a result of that pending litigation, I'm limited in my ability to comment further on that specific case. My Office of General Counsel will be in close contact with the Department of Justice on this matter. The most important thing to the American people and to all of us is the success of this military operation against terrorists who have been and continue to attack American service members was extremely successful, thanks to the leadership of President Trump and the actions of our brave men and women in uniform. As the heads of the American people's intelligence community, we will continue to provide the President, you in Congress, and our warfighters with timely, unbiased, relevant intelligence to keep our country secure, free, prosperous, and at peace. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Gabbard. We now turn to member questions. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to talk about, before I get into the threats, I want to talk about something we've talked about in this committee and in this setting before. We've had IC agency leaders commit to complying with our document requests but not follow through. And I don't know if this is due to direction from previous administration or middle management obstruction, but I find it completely unacceptable. In fact, I had to subpoena the NSA in order to cooperate with our AHI investigation last year. As you all know, it's the charge of this committee to conduct rigorous oversight, and part of that oversight is to occasionally requires us that we request documents from your organizations to enable our investigations. We cannot adequately do our jobs without your partnership and your cooperation. General Hawk and General Cruz, we had this conversation here before last year, and I'm not satisfied with your responsiveness. Therefore, I'm going to ask that question again on the record in this open setting to each of you. Do I have your unequivocal commitment to cooperating with document or other information requests from this committee, General Hawk?
You do, Chairman.
Thank you, General. Director Patel.
You do, Mr. Chairman.
Director Gabbard.
Yes, Chairman.
Director Ratcliffe.
Yes, you do, Chairman and Ranking Member. And I want to start by saying it's good to be back. It's good to see you. And as you all know, I have a special appreciation for the work that this committee does, having previously been a member. I also understand the importance of the oversight role that it has. And so you have my full commitment and my understanding about what your responsibilities are and my obligation to keep you fully and currently informed, and I will do that.
Appreciate that. General Cruz.
Chairman, of course, you have our continuing support on this critically important effort for the nation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to turn now to something that's a topic of conversation and really needs to be, and that's our own neighborhood here in our Western Hemisphere. I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm deeply concerned about encroachment in the Western Hemisphere, not just by China, but other adversaries like Russia and Iran, from Russian military cooperation with and support to Venezuela and Nicaragua, CCP-linked companies' acquisition of critical assets in Central and South America, Iran's defense agreement with Bolivia, the establishment of a technical military cooperation commission including Venezuela, Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran. And I could list several more alarming examples. I'm afraid we focus so much of our attention across the world that we've lost sight of our own neighborhood, leading to the anti-American regimes gaining permanent footholds within striking distance of the homeland. So, Director Gabbard, to the extent that you can discuss it in this setting, what is the intelligence community's assessment of adversary encroachment in the Western Hemisphere?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll be able to go into greater detail in the closed session, but the intelligence community assessment reflects what you have just detailed and outlined. The continued competition, encroachment, and investments that are occurring in the Western Hemisphere have rapidly increased and continue to pose a threat both to our economic interests and to our security. Every day there are new reports of further attempts. One just recently that came up yesterday with investments that are being made in the southeast part of the United States. Again, I'll go into this further in a closed setting, but the intelligence assessments that we are receiving are being shared with senior cabinet officials, Department of Energy, Commerce, Treasury, those who are working alongside us to not only monitor, but to determine the best policies that will protect our interests.
Thank you. I want to turn to Director Patel real quick in the time that I have left. If you can flesh this out for me just a little bit. You indicated something that caught my attention in the proceeding yesterday, and that was your involvement with the Judicial Drug Task Force that you partner with at the state level, and how that has yielded positive results with regard to cartel activity. Can you put a little finer point on that to describe those partnerships in the 53 seconds we have remaining?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, thanks for having us, Ranking Member. My priorities at the FBI have been to partner with state and local law enforcement in ways that we have not done so before, particularly on information sharing, and it's a two-way street. And in order for us to effectuate drug seizures and narcotics interdictions in the 50 states, we treat them as all border states, because that's what's happening. We have an American citizen die of a drug overdose every 7 minutes. That is wildly out of control and unacceptable. But the FBI cannot do that mandate and secure the American people from Washington, D.C. So we're putting resources in the field. We are working with our partners at the state and local level. And we are seeing immediate results, as we are seeing in Arkansas, as I outlined yesterday, with hundreds of arrests, thousands of pounds of narcotics seized, dozens of weapons, and multiple indictments.
Thank you, Director. I'm going to yield and recognize Ranking Member Himes for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's something I care as much about as the national security of the United States, it's the powers and prerogatives of this Congress and its oversight duties. So I want to spend a minute or so on yesterday's testimony in front of the Senate and direct these questions in particular to Director Patel and Director Gabbard. Yesterday, Senator Heinrich asked, did this conversation, referring to the signal chat, include information on weapons, packages, targets, or timing? Director Patel, you said not that I'm aware of. Director Gabbard, you said same answer. This morning we learned that the signal chat included the following update, forward-looking update from the Secretary of Defense. Time now, 11:44 Eastern Time. Weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM. We are go for mission launch. 12:15 Eastern Time. F-18 launch. First strike package. 13:45 trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Also, strike drones launch MQ-9s. 14:10 more F-18s launch. Second strike package. Do either of the directors want to reflect on their testimony yesterday in the context of what I just read?
Sure. 1, I was not on that signal chat. 2, I have not reviewed it. And 3, as you just indicated, that was made public this morning.
But, Director, you didn't, prior to yesterday's Senate, you were on the signal chat, correct?
No.
Okay, but did you review the material on the signal chat?
No, I wasn't on it.
Director Gabbard?
Yes, Ranking Member. My answer yesterday was based on my recollection, or the lack thereof, on the details that were posted there. I was not, and what was shared today reflects the fact that I was not directly involved with that part of the signal chat, and replied at the end reflecting the effects, the very brief effects that the National Security Advisor had shared.
So it's your testimony that less than 2 weeks ago, you were on a signal chat that had all of this information about F-18s and MQ-9 Reapers and targets on strike, and you in that 2-week period simply forgot that that was there. That's your testimony?
My testimony is I did not recall the exact details of what was included there.
That was not your testimony. Your testimony was that you were not aware of anything related to weapons packages, targets, and timing.
As the testimony yesterday continued on, there were further questions related to that, where I acknowledged that there was conversation about weapons, and I don't remember the exact wording that I used, but I did not recall the specific details that were included.
Director Gabbard, you've reasserted that there was no classified information. I think we can all agree that that information shouldn't have been out there. But let me ask you this. Are you familiar with the ODNI's classification guidance?
I'm familiar with it.
I've actually got a copy right here. If I read you a part of that guidance, I wonder if you could tell me what the level of classification indicated is. I'm reading from your classification guidance. And the criteria is information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing an attack. Do you recall what your own guidance would suggest that be classified?
I don't have the specifics in front of me, but it would point to what was shared would fall under the DoD's classification system and the Secretary of Defense's authority.
So let me
to
help you, because there's a
determine
very
what is
clear
classified
answer.
and what is not.
You don't, I guess you don't have it, but information providing, this is the ODNI guidance, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing an attack should be classified as top secret. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree with that. I just point out that the DoD classification guidance is separate from the ODNI's classification guidance.
Do you think it would be materially different?
Ultimately, the Secretary of Defense holds the authority to classify or declassify.
Do you think it's likely that DoD guidance is materially different from what I just read?
I haven't reviewed the DoD guidance, so I can't comment.
Director Gabbard, a lot of this suggests sort of a lack of sobriety. When there's punch emojis and fire emojis, it's a lack of sobriety. I don't mean that literally. But I have one last question for you, because I think people really listen to what you have to say. You, on March 15th, as DNI, retweeted a post from Ian Miles Chong, who is listed on RT, that's Russia Today's website, as, quote, a political and cultural commentator who has contributed content to RT since at least 2022. Director Gabbard, do you think that it's responsible for you as head of the intelligence community and the principal presidential intelligence advisor to retweet posts from individuals affiliated with Russian state media?
That retweet came from my personal account, and I would have to go back to look at the substance of the tweet.
Can I, just so that we don't have a lack of confusion amongst our allies and enemies and us, can I act perhaps that you not think that you should be saying one thing on your personal account than you say officially?
I maintain my First Amendment rights to be able to express my own personal views on different issues.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields now. Recognize the distinguished Vice Chairman, General Kelly.
Yeah, I'd now, for the first 30 seconds, Mr. Ratcliffe, or Director Ratcliffe, formerly known as Texas, from this Mississippi guy, I'd like to give you 30 seconds if you have anything to respond to what Ms. Gabbard Director Gabbard, I'm sorry, just said.
Well, Mississippi, it's good to see you again, and I appreciate the opportunity. You know, there's so much talk about this Atlantic article and about things that were said and that could have happened instead of a focus on what did happen. So my responsibility as CIA director, one of its responsibilities is to kill terrorists. And that's exactly what I did along with President Trump's excellent national security team. That's what we should be focused on. With regard to that article, I also would appreciate the opportunity to relay the fact that yesterday I spent 4 hours answering questions from senators as a result of that article that were intimating that I transmitted classified information because there were hidden messages. Those messages were revealed today and revealed that I did not transmit classified information, and that the reporter, who I don't know, I think intentionally intended it to indicate that. That reporter also indicated that I had released the name of an undercover CIA operative in that signal chain. In fact, I had released the name of my chief of staff, who is not operating undercover. That was deliberately false and misleading, and I appreciate the opportunity to reflect that my answers haven't changed. I used an appropriate channel to communicate sensitive information. It was permissible to do so. I didn't transfer any classified information. And at the end of the day, what is most important is that the mission was a remarkable success, is what everyone should be focused on here, because that's what did happen, not what possibly could have happened.
Thank you, Director Ratcliffe. Director Patel, thank you for the great job that you've done. So first of all, your coordination and trying to comply with the letter that was sent last year and the year before asking for the baseball shooting, of which what I got was basically what happened on the field, and I was there, so I don't need to know that, although no one from the FBI ever talked to me about what happened. They talked to people who were not there. but I appreciate your commitment to getting us the full unredacted report or the redactions, or to protect innocent people who are not part of the process, not the people who made decisions to classify that as suicide by cop as opposed to an assassination attempt of many members of Congress, of which I was one. Thank you for your commitment, Director Patel, because I know that you will give us what we have asked for so that we can put this to rest, Mr. Winstrup, myself, and several others. Can I get your commitment to do that, Director Patel?
In fact, I just got an update, Mr. Vice Chairman, from my team. You'll have all of those materials to you and your committee by the close of business today or at the latest tomorrow morning.
And just really quickly, Director Ratcliffe, and I don't want to go over time. I think it's so important for everybody to have their time. Can you tell me the impact that DOGE has had in causing you to fire people you shouldn't have fired, or release people who are instruments of national security no longer there? Tell me if you've had any impact specifically that DOGE has caused you to lose someone who was necessary for national security.
Given the fact that as of this date, no one from DOGE has been on the CIA campus, and I've had no direct communication with DOGE other than conversations with Elon Musk at cabinet meetings, I would say the impact is zero.
Director Patel?
I'm in a similar situation. We do work with DOGE on government efficiencies, but I have not seen any negative impacts at the FBI.
Thank you very much. And Director Gabbard, it's good to see you again, too. You know, I think we were freshmen together, you and I and Director Ratcliffe, and I'm here and you guys are like there. Have you seen any impact across the whole IC that DOGE has caused things that you can't respond to?
Yeah. Thank you, Congressman. It's great to see you all again here. The answer is no. Similar with Director Ratcliffe, DOGE has not been at ODNI. The President understands the essential national security mission that we have, and we are going through our own internal assessments to ensure we're achieving the effects in an efficient way that is responsible to the American taxpayer.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman, to the witnesses, many of whom I've worked with in the past. It appears that this year's report omitted any discussion of transnational concerns like global health security, infectious diseases, and the role of conflict, violence, and political instability play as drivers of migration. Coupled with the administration's cuts to USAID and other international assistance, particularly health and humanitarian assistance, won't these reductions and eliminations increase regional instability and volatility in areas already at high risk for threats? Was the IC consulted at all in the decisions to eliminate such critical funding, and why weren't these risks included in this year's report?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. The direction that I gave to our National Intelligence Council as they were putting together the annual threat assessment was to focus on the most direct and extreme threats that we face from non-state and state actors. While I acknowledge the factors that you've mentioned create an environment that our operators and intelligence officials need to be aware of, this year's annual threat assessment was really more targeted to focus on the direct threats that we have the ability to affect and impact. Some of those were included here that you mentioned with regard to the effects and impacts of USAID. That assessment has not yet been done, or at least to my knowledge, and was not considered to be included here.
Director Patel, this year's assessment, sir, confirms a threat I've worked on for a number of years, domestic extremists, including lone wolves, white nationalists motivated by racial or anti-government grievances, even religious grievances. Mr. Director, a few yes or no questions. Do you, sir, agree that these domestic threats must be addressed as thoroughly as foreign extremists?
All threats like that will be treated equally, yes, sir.
Is it true, sir, you moved personnel out of the FBI section responsible for countering domestic violent extremists?
I don't believe I did that.
Is it true, sir, that you've discussed disbanding this section?
I don't believe I've done that.
Will you pledge today, sir, not to disband this critical section?
I will pledge to you today that any personnel matters that are being worked on currently, once finalized, the congressional notification will be published to your committee.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, the former federal prosecutor, Mr. LaHood.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses today for your service to our country. And I want to focus my questions this morning on FISA Section 702. And Director Radcliffe, welcome back to the committee. In your confirmation hearing before the Senate, you were asked extensively about FISA and Section 702, and I think laid out a compelling narrative on how, as you described it, quote, how indispensable it is to national security. And you were also asked about a warrant requirement on Section 702. And your answer to that was, quote, on whether a warrant makes sense on 702, your quote was, "The answer is no. We're talking about national security issues where sometimes minutes matter in the ability to disrupt or interdict the bad actors or to act upon the intelligence that you can gain from that," unquote. Director, I wanted to ask you, is that still your belief today regarding the warrant requirement?
Congressman, it absolutely is. You've accurately reflected my prior testimony. It is also my testimony that 702 is indispensable to our intelligence picture, and the loss of it would be catastrophic to CIA. And the reason that I say that from this position is not only is 50% of all of our critical analysis provided to the President as Commander-in-Chief in the President's daily brief 702 derived, 70% of CIA's success with regard to advanced weapons counterproliferation is the result of 702 collected information. And finally, 90% of CIA's successful interdictions with regard to synthetic drugs like fentanyl are the result of 702 collection. It's absolutely indispensable to the work that CIA does, and I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to reflect that to this committee.
Thank you, Director. And just to ask a follow-up on that, as you know, in the House last year when we had our FISA reform and Section 702 reform measures put in place, you know, we had a debate, robust debate on the House floor regarding the warrant requirement. It was a very, very close vote, 212 to 212. Director Radcliffe, what can you tell our members to alleviate and reassure them on, again, the harm that a warrant requirement would do to 702?
Well, Congressman, it would impose a de facto ban on lawfully querying previously collected data to find threats against U.S. persons and government officials. So that would be, again, catastrophic to our efforts to keep our community safe. And I would also point out, because I know that these are legitimate concerns with regard when we talk about FISA and 702 specifically, everyone on this committee recalls that when I was a member, I also called out FISA abuses when they occurred. And I don't want there to be any violation of Americans' civil liberties and Fourth Amendment rights. But I would point to the CIA's, frankly, impeccable record of compliance, and we can talk about that more in a closed session.
Thank you, Director. Director Patel, I want to turn to you. Similar in your Senate confirmation, you were asked extensively about 702. And as you know, in our bill that we passed last year, we put lots of reforms and changes and protocols in place for the FBI. And I know that you're supportive of many of those. Specifically on the impracticalities of a warrant requirement on 702, you were quoted as saying, when you were asked about it, it is almost impossible to make that function of the warrant requirement work and to serve the national no-fail mission. Is that still your testimony here today?
It's great to see you, Congressman, and yes, that's my testimony.
Thank you. As you know, the reforms that we put in place were significant, requiring the FBI personnel to get a supervisor or attorney approval to conduct U.S. person inquiries, requiring high-level approvals up to the FBI deputy director level before certain queries are conducted on U.S. elected or appointed officials, candidates, or media personnel, requiring the Department of Justice to audit all U.S. person queries performed by the FBI within 6 months of each, with of 6 months of each query, reducing the number of FBI personnel who have the ability to query. Can you talk about the current implementation of those reforms and how that's going, Director Patel?
Absolutely. With probably the most recent one, in terms of 702 query reviews, we only have about 200 left when it comes to U.S. persons, and we will promulgate those findings to you. But as of today, of all the U.S. persons queried in the 702 databases, there's only been one instance of negligent conduct. We have already implemented limited access to those who actually know how to use the FISA process in 702, and we have implemented a direct reporting structure to the Office of Director and the Deputy Director to make sure that anyone, whether it's intentional or unintentional, abuses the 702 query system is brought to our attention immediately, and we will take that on for action directly. And in terms of piggybacking off Director Ratcliffe's, the public defender in me realizes the importance of constitutional due process more than anyone. The staffer in me from the House Intelligence Committee may be the only person who has worked more on FISA reform and exposing FISA abuse in modern congressional history. And the terrorism prosecutor in me and the JSOC civilian in me tells me that we cannot do away with 702 or FISA Title I and Title III, but we can work with you and your committee to make it better. I don't know all those ideas. I don't have all those answers, but you have my commitment that we will use it appropriately going forward.
Thank you, Director. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Tulsi, you and I came into the Congress together in 2013. And Cash, you and I was serving on the Intelligence Committee when you worked on the Intelligence Committee. And John, you and I are both from Texas, and we both served together on the Intelligence Committee. The idea that this information, if it was presented to our committee, would not be classified, y'all know is a lie. That's ridiculous. I've seen things much less sensitive be presented to us with high classification. And to say that it isn't is a lie to the country. I want to ask the generals now. The NSA is principally in charge of intercepting things like signals intelligence from other countries. General, I want to ask you, if your organization, your agency, intercepted something like this from Russia or China or some other country, would you consider this classified information?
Representative, we would be classifying based off of our sources and methods. So those would be the things that, in terms of how we process, how we would be able to obtain the information, and how we'd report it, we would classify based off of our source and method.
So if you knew that the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor of Russia or China and the head of the Foreign Ministry and all of the folks who were associated with that signal chain, if you intercepted that information, General, would you consider it classified?
So it would be classified based off of our collection.
So the NSA would classify it, would
based
determine
off
it as classified.
the protection of our own source and method, not necessarily based off the content, but how we collected that information.
But it would be classified.
Well, we certainly wouldn't be collecting on a U.S. person conversation.
No, I understand. I'm saying
but
if you did your job and collected it from the Russian Foreign Ministry and the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense and the President's Chief Advisor, there is no way, having sat on this committee for 9 years, that somebody would come in with that information and give us something that says, unclassified, you can walk out of this room with this information and give it to whomever you want. You know, with all respect, you and I worked on the committee at the same time. Tulsi, you and I came in together. I've never had an issue of beef with you. John, you and I are both from Texas. Y'all know that's a lie. It's a lie to the country. I want to ask about the Alien Enemies Act really quick while I have time. The President has used the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime authority last used to detain German and Japanese nationals during World War II, to summarily deport people accused of being members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Agua. To invoke this law, the President must demonstrate that the United States is under invasion by a foreign nation or government. They have alleged that we are under invasion by the Venezuelan government. The idea that we are at war with Venezuela would come as a surprise to most Americans. The unclassified version of the annual threat assessment the intelligence community just released makes no mention of any invasion or war that we are fighting with the nation of Venezuela. You would think our nation being at war would merit at least a small reference in this threat assessment. And Director Ratcliffe, does the intelligence community assess that we are currently at war or being invaded by the nation of Venezuela?
We have no assessment that says that.
Thank you. In invoking the law, the President alleged that Tren de Agua is, quote, undertaking hostile actions against the U.S. at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. Director Gabbard, does the intelligence community assess that the Venezuelan government is directing Tren de Agua's hostile actions against the United States?
There are varied assessments that came from different intelligence community elements. I'll defer to Director Patel to speak specifically to the FBI assessment.
But let me ask you, so you're saying there are conflicting assessments that have come from the IC?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. We'll take it up in closed session. All right. You know, your threat assessment makes issue of, highlights fentanyl trafficking as a top threat to the United States, yet support for law enforcement cooperation with Mexico has been put on hold, and there's been a threat of invasion to Mexico by the United States. You assess that Russia's advanced cyber capabilities make it a persistent counterintelligence cyber threat, yet the administration shut down the unit at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency tasked with stopping Russian cyber attacks. There are so many other ways that the actions of this administration have contradicted this threat assessment, and the administration is making the world and the United States more dangerous. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Chairman Crawford. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. I look forward to working with each and every one of you to keep our country and our planet safe. I wanted to carry on the topic of Section 702 reauthorization. Representative LaHood and I did a lot of work on this over the past 2 years. As you all know, last Congress, this committee worked in a bipartisan manner to advance the reauthorization of what most of us, if not all, deem to be our country's single and most important national security tool. The result was what was titled the Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act, which not only reauthorized Section 702, but equally important, it provided necessary reforms to our intelligence community in an effort to address past abuses. This was the largest single reform of the FBI and the IC in a generation, making sure that there are appropriate compliance guardrails that enhance accountability while still protecting the critical tools necessary for our nation's security. Just to name a few, in 2009, Section 702 protected our nation from an attack by an al-Qaeda member who intended to detonate explosives in the Manhattan subway lines. In 2014, Section 702 helped prevent attacks by assisting in the removal of ISIS leader Haji Imam. In 2022, Section 702 contributed to the U.S. government's operation against the last remaining 9/11 architect, Ayman al-Zawahiri. And as we saw in the horrendous attacks of October 7th, an attack on the people of Israel, where Hamas killed over 1,200 innocent civilians, intelligence collection is essential to the safety and security of our population. We must never, ever see another attack the likes of 9/11. Especially as a result of a self-inflicted intelligence failure. Not reauthorizing the use of this authority in this coming year would intentionally and willingly put the United States at a disadvantage against actors who seek our destruction. Representative LaHood touched on the warrant requirement. As you all know, that is really the linchpin here. And I think it's abundantly clear for members of this committee, members of this Congress, and for members of our intelligence committee to understand that a warrant requirement is on the collection of data. A warrant requirement cannot apply to the querying of already lawfully collected data. To follow that theory to its logical extreme would be to say that a police department who has an evidence locker containing lawfully collected data has to get a warrant to re-enter that evidence locker. It'd be akin to say to a police officer they cannot run a license plate, which is querying off of lawfully collected Department of Transportation data without getting a warrant. It would shut down the courts, it would shut down law enforcement, it would make our country much less safe. So I want to ask Director Patel, Director Ratcliffe, I want to yield the floor to you as we will be working with all of you, particularly your two agencies on reauthorization, to share your thoughts.
So it's great to see you, sir, and thanks for the question. Look, on 702, just to flesh out some of the more specific operational use that I have it with specifically relates to what you just said. When I was a terrorism prosecutor, we used 702 directly to prevent the shopping mall in Houston from being blown up. We used 702 collection directly to prevent an attack on the state capitol in the state of California. And those individuals were prosecuted and are currently in prison. And balancing that awesome responsibility with the constitutional protections that every American should have when we're talking about U.S. persons specifically is something that I keep in mind on every single decision surrounding 702. But as Director Ratcliffe stated, and has been my experience, while I understand and appreciate the concerns for the warrant requirement based on U.S. persons, if there is a solution that allows that to happen in real time, then we can have that discussion. But I have not encountered one, and thus it obviates the need in my perspective, in my mission set to protect the American people and hunt down criminals in its application. So where it is now with the reforms y'all have implemented, we've done a great job on protecting American civil liberties, and I'm always open to, and I do believe we can do some more.
Director Ratcliffe.
Good to see you again, Congressman. I agree with Director Patel's comments with regard to that. I'll start out by saying, obviously in this role, I'm not a policymaker. But at the appropriate time, when this comes up for renewal, I think I made it clear and will make it clear from the CIA's perspective the indispensability of 702 as a tool to providing the commander-in-chief an accurate picture of the threat environment. You mentioned some examples of 702 success. When we get into the classified session, later this afternoon, I have some further examples of 702 success that we can talk about, and I think that reflects my position.
Thank you all. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming. Thank you for your service. Director Gabbard, you said no classified information was included in the signal chat, correct?
That's correct.
And President Trump also said there was no classified information in the signal chat. And Secretary Hegseth said nobody was texting war plans. There was absolutely no classified info in that chat. Lieutenant General Cruz, I'd like to talk to you about a couple things real quick. Executive Order 13526, Section 1.4a. This is the Trump administration's executive order with regard to classified information. It says, information shall be classified if its unauthorized disclosure could reasonably be expected to cause damage to national security, including military plans, weapon systems, or operations. You don't disagree that that's accurately quoted, right?
That's an accurate quote from the executive order.
And DOD 5200.01, this is the DOD's manual on classification, says, quote, information shall be classified if its unauthorized disclosure could reasonably be expected to cause describable damage to national security. This includes military plans, weapon systems, or operations. You don't disagree that I quoted that accurately, right?
That's also an accurate quote.
Can I show you I'd like to show you the text that Secretary Hegseth actually published to the world. Now, Lieutenant General Cruz, as Ranking Member Himes said, it says, time now, weather is favorable, just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch. Then it says at 12:15 Eastern, F-18's launch, first strike package. F-18s are military systems, correct? Weapon systems.
They are.
Okay. 13:45, trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Also, strike drones launch, MQ-9s. MQ-9s is a weapon system, correct?
They are.
Okay. I think applying the executive order as well as the DOD manual to this fact pattern, we clearly have weapon systems that have been identified. That is classified information. Now, the reason why it's important that this information not be disclosed is that we don't want the adversaries to know what's about to happen, right, sir?
Well, I would draw small distinction there. You referenced and asked if those two platforms are weapon systems. They are, but those terms are used all across the globe in a lot of contexts. So it's really about how they're used in the context of this particular document. I just want to clarify that the use of those terms,
I understand.
Yeah.
In this situation, those are operational details.
They are operational details, but again, as you quoted the DoD instruction, it's about operations. So as you further go down into what are the operational details, I think as we had a discussion yesterday, the important aspect, I think all of us are very familiar.
This is classified information. This is classified information. It's a weapon system, as well as sequence of strikes, as well as details about the operations. And so I think that just piggybacking off of what some other members have said, using the DoD's manual as well as the executive order in operation today with the Trump administration, this text message is clearly classified information. Secretary Hegseth has disclosed military plans as well as classified information. He needs to resign immediately. He needs to resign immediately, and a full investigation needs to be undertaken with regard to whether other similar signal chats are occurring in this administration. I'd like to turn my attention to another topic. Director Patel, according to the DOJ, in 2022, the FBI led Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, in my hometown of Chicago, valiantly led efforts to prevent a plot to attack Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois. You don't dispute that, do you, sir?
I'm not familiar with it, but I don't dispute what you're telling me.
Thank you. A memo obtained by ABC 7 News of Chicago said that this task force will now be, quote, actively supporting, close quote, the Department of Homeland Security and its immigration enforcement. You don't dispute that either, do you?
I'm just not familiar with it, sir.
Okay. Sir, I just have to say, the DOJ has now tasked JTTFs to shift some resources to immigration enforcement efforts. And I don't say this lightly, if there's a terrorist attack anywhere in the country, including in Chicago, and it was because the JTTFs in part shifted resources, they'll be held to pay. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gabbard, was the target terrorist named in the text, or was it simply referred to as target terrorist?
The target was not named.
Thank you. Was the location named?
Congressman, no locations were named.
Thank you. Director Patel, there was a specific accusation made about how close we are working with Mexico currently. My understanding, and I want to congratulate you on this, and I think it shows a shift of focus at the FBI since you've taken over to what it should have been doing all along, which is chasing the 10 most wanted that are threatening our country. My understanding is that 2 of the 3 were actually arrested in Mexico and are being extradited back to the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We have been working. One of the first meetings I took as FBI director was my counterpart, Secretary Farouche in Mexico. And subsequent to that, we have repaid or extradited or expelled from Mexico 2 top 10 of the FBI's most wanted list and 33 other criminals.
Well, it sounds to me like we're working closer with them today than we have in the last several years, and that the focus of the FBI has shifted to actually protecting American citizens instead of arresting pro-life protesters.
Our mission is to find violent criminals wherever they are, and if they're in Mexico, we're going to get them.
Thank you. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate the change in the focus of the FBI. I want to talk with you a little bit about the counterintelligence threats, one of which was an active-duty U.S. Army soldier charged with conspiring to transmit national defense information to individuals located in China. What can you say in this setting, or can you briefly explain your work with interagency partners to identify and neutralize counterintelligence threats in the United States around this example?
For me, sir?
Yes, sir.
So generally speaking, on counterintelligence and countering espionage, whether it's from adversaries like the CCP, Russia, Iran, or otherwise, we have prioritized them as an equally violent criminal enterprise seeking to do harm to our critical infrastructure and also to exploit and steal our data, whether it's government or private personnel. And so we have expanded our resources into them and working with the interagency to make it a priority.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on to the issue of the threshold of parole under the previous administration and the number of illegal immigrants that have come into this country, including people with known membership in terrorist groups. For those individuals that pose a risk and that we have captured and are being deported, are we sharing the biometric and biographic information with our allies to mitigate their ability to relocate or operate abroad?
What we are doing at the FBI is sharing the information we're allowed to with our Five Eye partners, and then on an individual basis, we are trying to share information with other partners who deemed individuals that they find of consequence.
Okay. As you move further into your position, if you have additional recommendations on how we better share information, please let us know.
Yes, sir.
Director Ratcliffe, China's influence on the Panama Canal has increased since 2017. Panama became the first Latin American country to sign on to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Can you talk about not just China embedding itself into the various canal-related sectors and operations, but what other areas in Central and South America have China and others increased their presence, and what examples concern you the most?
Thanks, Congressman. Appreciate the question. I do want to comment, the question before about cooperation with Mexico, it's really across the IC. When Mexico's Secretary General Omar Harfuch, head of Mexican security, was here, he not only met with Director Patel, he met with Director Gabbard, and he met with me. So we have been working on that, again, to the benefit of both our countries. To your point, the PRC throughout Central and South America continues to attempt to use its soft power to gain a foothold. They use direct aid to countries that need it. They also provide funding to universities to get a foothold to create influence. And you mentioned the Panama Canal, and you've seen the diplomatic efforts of the administration to address that and push back on PRC ownership of the canal locks. But that ties into what the IC is doing. In these instances, it's important for us, Congressman, to the best way we can operate is to provide intelligence to countries in Central and South America, to provide them with briefings, which we do, to provide them with tailored analysis of our intelligence about how China is manipulating them, about how China is hacking them, the things that China is doing to gain a foothold, and Russia and Iran throughout that area. So the CIA is very much focused on that.
Gentleman's time's expired. Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Chairman. General Hawk, the NSA recently warned its employees not to use the Signal app. Is that correct?
What we did, Congressman, is we put out cybersecurity advisories on a whole host of systems.
On the Signal app that was included in that advisory, right?
What we've done is we've put out an advisory on how to use the Signal app and other encrypted applications, because we do encourage our employees and their families to use encrypted.
Because there's risk to that app.
There are.
Okay. General Cruz, DOD also issued a warning about vulnerabilities to the Signal app recently, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Director Gabbard, you were on the Signal text chain in question, correct?
Yes.
As was Mr. Witkoff, the administration's lead negotiator with the Russians, correct?
Yes.
And at the time, Mr. Witkoff was actually in Russia during this chat discussion, was he not?
I was not aware of that.
Was he on his personal phone at the time?
I don't know.
Well, it's my understanding that he was indeed in Russia. Director Gabbard, you were also traveling during this discussion, correct?
Yes.
And where were you?
I was traveling through the Asia-Pacific region. I don't recall which country I was in at that time.
You don't remember the country?
I'd have to go back and look at the schedule.
Director Gabbard, I want to direct your attention again to the text chain where it says, Just confirmed with CENTCOM we are a go for mission launch. Does that indicate to you that there is about to be a military operation?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, earlier in this hearing, we heard about the DoD's classification standards. I want to now turn my attention to your classification standards. You're the Director of National Intelligence. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence classification guide says, quote, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing for an attack, end quote, is to be classified as top secret. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, have the Houthis indicated an ability to shoot down American aircraft?
Yes.
They have in fact done so, haven't they?
Yes.
Including MQ-9 Reapers, haven't they?
That's correct.
And that was one of the systems used in the attack recently that's the subject of this discussion, is it not?
Correct.
General Cruz, are you familiar with this system?
I'm not wearing my glasses at the moment, but...
Well, I'll help you out. This is an SA-3 anti-aircraft system.
Correct.
Are you familiar with this next system?
I am.
What is it?
I'm going to have to ask you.
It's an SA-6.
I'm going to guess that
this is also an advanced anti-aircraft system, is it not?
It is. It was used widely in the Balkans in the 90s, correct?
And the Houthis also have this system, don't they?
They certainly do.
And they've employed it against our aircraft, have they not?
They have attempted to, correct.
I spent my life in service to this country. I deployed 3 times to combat in service to this nation. I learned in that time in service that responsibility is core to leadership. You accept responsibility when things go wrong. You admit mistakes. You set the standard from the very top. It is completely outrageous to me that administration officials come before us today with impunity, no acceptance of responsibility, excuse after excuse after excuse, while we send our men and women downrange to do incredibly difficult, incredibly dangerous things on our behalf. And yet, nobody is willing to come to us and say this was wrong. This was a breach of security and we won't do it again. It is outrageous and it is a leadership failure, and that's why Secretary Hegseth, who undoubtedly transmitted classified, sensitive operational information via this chain, must resign immediately. There can be no fixes, there can be no corrections until there is accountability, and I'm calling on the administration to move forward with accountability. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Good to see many of you again, and thank you for enduring 2 long days. I will note I always use fire emojis when I see terrorists getting killed. And I want to talk about cartels. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I've been investigating it thoroughly for the last couple of years, and I'm glad to see that it's mentioned in all of your opening statements. I mentioned it at the very beginning of the threat assessment. There's a lot to work on here. One of our task force, we had a cartel task force in Congress. One of our key findings was that there needs to be a centralized, maybe call it authority or maybe call it office, maybe call it cartel czar within the administration that actually coordinates all the very different aspects of fighting this battle. Has anything like that been talked about? I'll go to you, Ms. Director Gabbard.
Thank you, Congressman. It's good to see you again. This is very much central to the conversations and planning and execution of the President's focus on targeting the cartels and the threats that they pose to the American people. Homeland security task forces are being set up that include across the government integration. I can speak from my standpoint from the intelligence community, and our National Counterterrorism Center is leaning heavily forward into gathering and consolidating and integrating the intelligence that comes from DEA and others who've been working this issue for a while to make it so that it can be shared and integrated through the federal, state, and local law enforcement equities who are going after this problem.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot more about that exact thing in closed session, but at a higher level, our recommendation is there needs to be someone at a much higher level that coordinates state, DOD, CIA, FBI, Homeland. It's a massive problem, one I'm all too familiar with. Director Patel, the FBI is tasked with working foreign corruption charges. In the past administration, the FBI told me they actually don't focus on Mexico very much. Because, now in their defense, they say the reason is because they won't get anything out of it, because they don't have a cooperative government to work with. I think a lot has changed. Do I have your commitment that we will at least start following up on those, because the judiciary system in Mexico is a key component in our failures to address the cartels?
You do, Congressman. Apologies for not getting back to you sooner.
You're good. Appreciate it. I also want to ask you that the FBI has disrupted an alarming number of terrorist attacks in the last year, last 2 years. Great on the FBI for doing that. I don't think many Americans realize how good the FBI has been at this. But this also gets to the conversation earlier about FISA 702. One of the main arguments I wanted to argue with my colleagues on this was, when you have a warrant process for the query, what you will fail to do is connect the dots between the domestic and the international threat, and those connections are there, as we see all the time. Would you agree with that? That we need to maintain that process in a responsible way, of course.
I do, sir.
I appreciate that. Director Gabbard, in my remaining time, I want to ask you, because of my, and this may go to our General Cruz as well. Because of my work on energy and commerce, we have an issue there with broadband spectrum auctions, and of course this affects our intelligence community in a very large way, and our DoD. Getting right to the question here, how much, if any, spectrum can the DoD give up without having a significant effect on the administration's prioritization of lethality and deterrence?
I'll defer to General Cruz, specific to DOD.
I certainly wouldn't want to speak for all of DOD, and I think the committee is already in a fantastic conversation with the DOD on that issue. But broadly, what I would say is DOD has laid out the portions of the spectrum that it believes for both operational capabilities, and in closed session, I am more than happy to walk you through from the intelligence portion of the mission that we do. There are two different portions of the spectrum. We often talk about one, but not the other, and in closed session, I'd be more than happy to tell you why the other portion of the spectrum is important to national security.
Sure, and the details are obviously classified, but we can talk about X and S spectrums and get a better idea for the public about, because the public would benefit from telecom having the ability to use some of these. When we look at 5G networks, 6G networks, so it's a conversation that we need to have and a much longer time to do so, which I've run out of. So I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Dr. Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I associate myself with the comments of my colleague, Congressman Crow. I'm deeply disappointed in how we're handling this breach of protocol and so forth. You know, every year at the beginning of Congress, we take an oath to office. You know, this is an awesome responsibility to be a member of Congress, to protect our country. We have no greater responsibility than to protect our homeland. And, you know, when I walk into this committee and the honor of being on this committee, I don't see Democrats and Republicans. I see folks that every day want to do the same thing. But as Congressman Crow suggested, the mark of leadership, and we all are leaders in this room, is to accept responsibility when mistakes happen. And that signal chat was a mistake. I'm not here to impugn your character. You were all nominated by the president. You were all confirmed by the president. But we have an awesome responsibility, an incredible responsibility to the American people. And then given that we are the United States of America, we have a responsibility to the world. And this really was a breach of protocol. I'll take you at your word that we are going to do a full investigation of it. Our responsibility as oversight is to understand this breach, understand who leaked information, how that happened, and then hold those responsible. You know, I 100% agree with the chairman in his opening statement. He said, where trust is breached, those responsible need to be held accountable. So do I have, you know, Director Gabbard, we served together, we came into Congress together.
Do I have your word when